Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. I just noticed I haven't brushed my hair. Oh, well. Oh well. Who cares? Let's get on with it. Richard, how are you, mate? G'day, Simple. Chatelaine, good to have you here. Thanks for subscribing. Hi, Harry, new subscriber here. How many milligrams of sodium should we shoot? Shooting up, snorting? In which way? For a day. I've been struggling with this for years, and it's beginning to look like a lot more than I would have ever imagined. 5'8". Look, it really varies between a lot of different populations around the world. Some populations, at the end of the day, if you elevate insulin to a certain level, you will retain in more electrolytes, sodium, and stuff like that. So, eating sufficient protein plays a big role, on a carnivore diet. But in general, getting enough nutrients in will basically, give you a bit of a boost in your insulin, which helps with retention. Another important factor that I always talk about, most people know that are on my channel, is about taurine, which is an osmolyte. It regulates electrolytes, basically. The problem is that most of our food supply now isn't freshly slaughtered. In the past, meat would be hunted, slaughtered, but even in traditional societies, you would have your local butcher. You would go, they would slaughter on the day because there was no refrigeration. So you'd slaughter and you would season like salt. You would salt the meats and stuff like that. So the meats that you cut, you salt. The other animals you would hang up in a cool type room, which they used to use big ice cubes. And as a consequence of that, you would, there wouldn't have a lot of loss because in the fluids of the actual animal is where the taurine is, both in the cells and both in the extracellular and intracellular fluids, both the ones inside the cells and outside the cells. When you hang an animal up for a number of months, like is what happens, the practices today for most supermarket meat, a lot of those fluids are lost. And with the fluids, you lose taurine, which is a sulfur amino acid, like methionine, like cysteine and stuff like that. But it plays an important regulatory role in the body. And so our food supply tends to have far less now. So if you were to get fish, which is a higher source of taurine, and it's been snap frozen, well, that's retained its taurine because it's been snap frozen, wild caught snap frozen. If, on the other hand, it's been sitting for a while, it's been salted, sitting for a while, it will lose a bit, but not a lot. It's usually muscle meats that are the big ones that lose quite a bit. They don't, in the first place, they don't have the same levels of quantities that seafood has, but they also basically lose more when they're hung or when they're dried out. So as a consequence, our food supply isn't what it was, isn't as fresh, you could say. Taurine is really important for a whole lot of regulatory functions throughout the body. I've done a recent video with Pim covering a lot of that stuff. I've done a lot of videos covering a lot of that stuff, but it's an osmolyte, which means it's a regulator of basically fluids, and electrolytes. It will actually determine, when there's enough in the system, it'll actually determine how much of those ions are in the right place. So it'll make sure that there's enough, magnesium, potassium in the cell at a certain gradient. And because the body tries to maintain electron neutrality, it will actually move negative and positive ions between until it actually achieves that. Any shift of any of these ions, immediately there is a shift. This is why when you do strange things with electrolytes and all that, you can get sort of funny sort of disturbances. That's because you're basically disturbing this regulatory system that is done properly by the system when you've got sufficient meat in your diet, fresh meat in particular. It's probably one reason why raw meat tends to basically have a bit more taurine. Obviously, when you cook meat, you'll actually extract a number of other important, you know, micronutrients from it, and that's another reason why we cook things. So there's a bit of, raw versus they have a slightly, it's a very minuscule, the variation in profile. At the end of the day, if you don't overcook things and you don't basically over dry things, you won't lose a lot of those fluids. You won't lose those important, even electrolytes within the actual, and the regulatory sulfur amino acid, this sulfonic acid as it's called, that plays this important role. So you may be not eating enough meat and potentially not getting enough taurine, and so you've been struggling regulating. I've been in that same boat. I used to do keto in the past, and I had, cramps and all sorts of issues. I don't. I get enough taurine, and I supplement occasionally, depending on what foods that I eat. And I sort of know that I may not be getting enough for the day because of the food source. So I'll, if it's fresh meat, I won't bother. If it's basically supermarket meat, I'll definitely will. So there are these sort of variations. And Ryan's put up the one that I talk about. Ryan LeBear. So that's the one it's the only one that I usually recommend, is because it's in a free form. It's exactly like it's in meat. It's in a free form. It's not bound to any fillers or any crap or whatever. And it's a much better way of sort of regulating. Eating more meat should, with enough salt to taste. I always basically, if my food is, if I taste my food and it's, I'm going, it's not, doesn't seem salty enough, I'll put extra salt. If it seems too salty, I'll sort of scrape some off and stuff like that. So I'll go through stages. But nowadays, I've sort of worked out exactly the amount that I need with the foods that I'm eating. And so I don't really have these issues. Now, tribal people used to drink blood to get part of those electrolytes. So they did other things. Plus, it was freshly slaughtered, and the fluids were still there. I mean, you can still see the Inuits in some old videos literally drinking those fluids, which are very high in taurine. And a lot of the actual tribal people drinking some of those fluids, which they'll get some of these important sulfur amino acids. So we don't live the same way. So when you're doing a pure carnivore diet, in the modern supermarket, in the modern type of way, we actually deal with foods, and we process foods, and we slaughter foods, and we supply foods and all that. By the time you get it, it can be months. It's hung, it's lost a lot of its, it's probably halved or sometimes even down to a third of the original amount of taurine in there. And that makes a big difference, because it's not like I've hunted this animal, I've killed it, I've got it, I've actually got the right composition of all those nutrients, sulfur amino acids and everything else. I'm good to go. I don't need any supplementation. I don't need anything outside beyond that. The reason why the low carb community has been struggling with electrolytes for a very long time is because of the important osmolyte that regulates all these fluids. It actually also acts as a calcium sort of channel blocker. So it regulates calcium, regulates every mineral, that you can think of. People that have had hemochromatosis sorted, again, because it regulates iron metabolism. So it does all these sort of things. And as a consequence, people normalize their proper functioning. Now, on a mixed diet, like a SAD diet, people tend to have they're running a higher level of water retention and fluid retention due to higher insulin secretion, but that's unhealthy. And at the same time, they're actually holding on to slightly more electrolytes. The higher the insulin goes, the less electrolytes you need. And Walter Kempner did the experiment years ago when he did a very low fat, high carbohydrate diet. He actually used to whip his patients back in the 1930s to force them to consume more sugar in order to keep their, their situation sort of without, breaking down muscle meat, the muscles of their body, and breaking that down. So, and he only basically supplemented iron, and he only did it for a year for a specific ailment that could have been fixed with a ketogenic diet, but he was unaware of. So it was actually disengaging the Randall cycle and allowing lowering the growth factors, which is what high energy intake, Randall cycle activation, SAD diet of a lot of sugar and fat at the same time. I've discussed this in many other of my videos. Bart Kay's done a couple of videos on the Randall cycle. I've discussed it on multiples, so you'd have to go through. I'm not going to discuss it at this stage. And really, I would say, mate, look at taking a bit of supplemental taurine and seeing whether that sort of regulates things, and only consume sodium to taste. You don't need, if you're regulating all the electrolytes properly, then you only need to take it to taste, and you don't need to worry about magnesium, potassium, and all that. You excrete less than you take in from animal foods. I've got some videos. So if you actually do check my videos, you will actually find videos that I've done on potassium and magnesium, how much we excrete every day. So just Harry Serpanos, magnesium or potassium, you'll find those videos and you'll get the real information, not the bullshit information. On a carnivore diet, we end up using less micronutrients. It's usually carbohydrate metabolism. It tends to use more magnesium, potassium, all these things. And the excretion rate is more than covered. In many cases, the body will excrete, when you're on a carnivore diet, when you eat a lot of meat, it'll excrete some of that excess, both potassium and magnesium, because as long as you've got enough taurine to regulate and keep enough, and recycle, because it also recycles your little nephrons in your kidneys. So those little tubule things, that's where basically taurine basically makes sure that everything is regulated properly and regulates what goes out in the urine and what actually gets recycled and recovered. And so it's really important. This is why people on keto diets that are actually too high fat, very low protein, not getting enough taurine, low insulin, not to be able to retain these things in, tend to have more electrolyte issues. So don't fear meat. I've done a lot of videos covering a lot of those points, so check them out and you'll realize that it's all BS. Anyway, I hope I sort of covered your point. There's there's not eggs, it's to your requirements of your body. Your body will tell you, because and also don't consume a lot of water. We hydrate with fat, not water. Overconsumption of water also causes a lot of electrolyte issues. So you end up requiring more. So not a good thing. We weren't meant to. No tribal population actually hydrates like we do. It's just basically due to our higher carbohydrate intake that we've had a higher requirement, because carbohydrates actually produce less metabolic water inside the mitochondria. So they only produce about 0.44 of 44%, where fat actually produces 110%, 10% more. So that's the difference why your body can hydrate. That's why the camel can hydrate. That's why all our tribal populations that have got their own fat stores on board can actually do that same, being in this low-grade ketosis. That's how we're supposed to be. Unfortunately, modern people have decided to, eat a lot of garbage and have ended up taking a very different path in the way they manage their physiology. And that's why they have all these problems, unfortunately. Yes, I've actually got it here. Waiting until 11 o'clock before I break my fast, my time restricted feeding cycle. So as you guys know. Ah, yes. G'day, Lukey. Raymond, good to see you, mate. G'day, Ryan. Good to see you, mate. And Sammy, good to see you from the UAE. How are things over there? I suspect blazing bloody hot. Yeah, it's getting a bit on the cool side down here. Yeah, bit of a undercut. Not as sort of varies, but it's not as yeah. We're heading. It's autumn. We're heading into winter. It's a bit all over the place at the moment. Bit of rain here. I'm sort of taking my umbrella and raincoat all the time with me just in case. So I got drenched one night. Wasn't pretty. I just went straight in, took all my clothes off, and just went in straight, had a shower. So anyway, good. Yeah, it was great seeing you on the Zoom session last time. Anyway, take care, mate. G'day, Deborah. Good to see you. Oops. G'day, Michelle. 9 weeks carnivore. My blood pressure is now 96/62. Is that okay? Look, some people's blood pressure, my youngest sister, I used to have a higher blood pressure. Mine's come down into the sort of 100 odd. I showed people on one of my live streams ages ago. And my sister's basically came up. So she was like you, quite low, sometimes she'd pass out. She was doing vegetarian for 25 years, had asthma. We reversed all that. So she's not a pure carnivore. She's sort of low carb. She does the, on off a couple of months, probably about half to a third of the year she'll do pure carnivore, and then she'll go back to doing some vegetables and stuff like that. So it's usually pumpkins and sweet potatoes and stuff like that she usually does. But she for a long time had a very low blood pressure and really struggled to get it up. When she does more pure carnivore, it does come up a bit compared to she hasn't had one incident. But the key thing that actually changed her, because she struggles eating enough meat, and so it's just, I've told her, she just, I can't eat it. You're fine. I'm not going to argue with you. You don't argue with your sisters. You need to. I've got two, and I'm the middle child, so I've been basically negotiating between the two for a very long time. So let's leave it at that. But taurine is what made the difference. It sort of normalized her, because what it does is, if you've got really low blood pressure, it brings it slightly up to the normal range. If you add a bit of, you salt more, because some people have, like we have in our family, my father, myself, we oversweat. We sweat like mad very easily, and we tend to lose a lot of electrolytes. So I tend to salt my food far more. I have to. And so is my sister. She's got in the habit now of really heavily salting her food. And she still sometimes goes, well, it doesn't taste, like it's salty, So, but by taking taurine, which regulates the electrolytes, and actually upping her intake of sodium by consuming more salt, she's actually improved her blood pressure. It's actually come up, and she hasn't had one incident of passing out, which is great. So she's actually, even though she's not pure carnivore, she's sort of, and she doesn't eat enough meat, she's sort of supplementing the taurine component that you would get by eating more meat. And so that's sort of sorted out that problem for her in that regard. So look, a lot of people sometimes struggle either way. You're either men, it's usually high blood pressure. Women, it's usually low blood pressure. And it's, one of those things. So and by eating sufficient protein, getting enough taurine, it usually regulates it. I don't know what your intake is. I don't know how you're approaching this. Some people have difficulty with certain things, the way they consume them. Things like eggs have more taurine. Seafood has more taurine. In particular, things like oysters, which I love very much. Usually, if I have oysters, I don't bother supplementing at all for the day, because, just pretty much you can get over a gram just from 3 ounces or, 85 grams. So it's not a struggle, believe me. And yeah, that's probably the best solution is up either supplement taurine and add some additional salt, because you may be one of those people that tends to, excrete sodium far more than others. Does happen. It's just one of those things. It's genetics. There are these variations in populations, and the populations that retain quite a lot. And I know a number of carnivores that when they cut back their water, their antidiuretic hormones upregulate and your sodium requirements come down and things normalize as well. In my case, even though I've upregulated my antidiuretic hormones because I don't consume a lot of water, I still lose a lot from sweat. I sweat profusely. I've got these sort of, because my father comes from a mountain region, actually even mum's side originated in a mountain region, and tend to have these like hypothermia. I don't feel cold even in winter, genes, but when I'm in summer and all that, I sweat profusely. I mean, if I'm in the tropics, I'm just literally, I take my t-shirt off and I have to do this to get so, and if I'm in a sort of a remote area, I take my shorts off as well and do the same thing without upsetting too many of the natives, the locals. So, yes, but yeah, there are those differences. So I don't know exactly from your question. So play around, give it a go and see what happens and how it works out for you. And let me know if you're still struggling. That's what we're here for. There seems to be much confusion over what a fasting mimicking diet actually is. Can you explain, please? Is it good or bad? Look, fasting mimicking diets, there are a lot of variations. People have a lot of different views of them. Okay, so the classical fasting mimicking diet is basically green vegetables, like a bit of the Orthodox, a lot of the old religious orders and all that, where it's a very low carbohydrate type green vegetables with no animal foods, stuff like that. That's what a fasting mimicking diet traditionally was for religious orders and stuff like that. For the modern sort of incarnations, it's like if you look at some of the products out there, it's sort of a component of very little protein, certain types of fats, which I would question their rancidity and their oxidation, so I'd avoid them like the plague, and some carbohydrate and very little low glycemic, as they call them, or glycemic. Really, all carbs turn into sugar. It's the glycemic load, and that even that is questionable in many regards, all that sort of stuff. But that's the sort of way they put them together. Now, can you do a sort of a carnivore fasting mimicking diet? As long as it's just basically sort of liquid fats and stuff like that, and you can tolerate them, yeah, you probably could in that regard. But it's a sort of an oxymoron. It's really was used primarily from religious orders to where people couldn't tolerate basically not having anything in their stomach. So it was an easier way of actually giving them a certain type of a small amount of caloric intake, just to basically blunt the severe hunger, to be able to cope and stuff like that. That was really what it is. I mean, beyond that, some of the modern incarnations are all over the place in different variations and stuff like that. But it tends to be, if you're really, as long as you're disengaging the Randall cycle, and primarily it's done by being a plant-based type approach where you take out all the fat out, all the protein, and you just focus on the, and you can do it the other way around. You can take, as long as you keep mTOR from activating, and you've basically got very, either sugar or fat and only sugar or fat, and no and bugger all protein, then in technically terms that is a fasting mimicking diet of one sort, because you're not activating, um, you know, you won't activate too much the mTOR pathway, but and the IGF-1 pathway, but and even the insulin pathway, because a small amount of sugar won't really, because remember the insulin to glucagon, it's still going to be very, very low. It's going to be close to 1 or below. So that's the sort of approach. I can't see the value of fasting mimicking diets just to a fast, so I can't see the, nowadays I usually tend to do a dry fast. I don't even bother with wet fasts. I sort of hydrate myself with a lot of fat 2 days earlier. So I will use a lot of liquid fats and stuff like that. I'll really up my fat intake and really get myself into a very high ketogenic sort of state. And then I'll shift into a dry fast for 2 or 3 days, and then I'll pop back and stuff like that. Just have to be careful with fluids when you're coming off after a couple of days. Your throat and all that will dry out, and you'll have less that part of your esophagus and all that will be also have less blood flowing into that area. As a consequence of that, you will really, even at room temperature fluids, it will be like drinking really extremely cold water. Drink cold water and you'll find yourself really feeling horrendously like you've been attacked by something. So you just have to be very careful. Have a warm bone broth or something like that, or some make some sort of chicken soup or whatever, something warm without the carbs, minus the carbs exactly. That's probably a better way of actually breaking something like that if you're coming out of a dry fast, just for people to know. But generally speaking, I just see them as irrelevant. It's just certain types of people are basically promoting these sort of stuff because they can sell product. If you want to do a fast, just do a fast. Like I don't see the value in it. I can understand it from a religious point of view, where people want to, they struggle and they need something like a crutch. That's fine. I can understand that. But from a physiological point of view, why bother? So in my personal opinion, I've been eating 1 pound of roast, 0.5 pound pork belly, 9 slices of salty pork. I think about 5 to 6,000 milligrams a day, and I started to feel a lot better. Okay, good. So you're already picked up on some of that information. Sounds good. Bruce, how are you, mate? Hey, mate. I sadly had to eliminate butter, my last dairy offender, and my skin is greatly clearing up. Yep, look, some people just can't tolerate dairy. Simple as that. It's just, there can be a lot of factors why they can't. It may be a gut microbiome related issue, or it may be genetic. If it's genetic, well, can't really sort that out. If it's gut microbiome, I've had people doing kefirs and stuff like that. Hello, Kitty knows a fellow called Mr. Baby, and he basically is a young bloke. He's Hong Kong Chinese, and he's basically now can tolerate dairy, has no problems whatsoever, no skin problems, no nothing. But before he couldn't. But he did a lot of kefir, did the lactobacillus types and stuff like that. Rebuilt his gut microbiome. He's been doing taurine. He's been doing a couple of the other things to improve inflammasome and actually remodulate the gut microbiome. I've done the videos. You probably are aware of all that sort of stuff. In your case, it just may be genetics. I mean, it's just unfortunate. Not everybody is suited for eggs or dairy. It's just the way it is. Yeah, whatever works for you. At the end of the day, you have to feel good in your skin and be able to cope with that sort of stuff. I don't know why my webcam today is just so it's further away, and I've tried to adjust it, but move further in. Just not really doing it today. I'll have to sort it out for the other one. Been blocked out largely by the text as well. I started taking the Taurine. Yep, I've been averaging 119.78 after a month using it. My DS was in the lower 90s prior. There you go. Yeah, because that's what it's supposed to do. It's not supposed to lower blood pressure. It's supposed to regulate blood pressure. It's supposed to bring it to the proper physiological level to normalize it. That's what it's supposed to do. If it's too low, brings it up. If it's too high, it brings it down. And if it doesn't do that, then there's some other problem there. We have to work out what it is. So you've sort of normalized it. That's what my sister did also. Hers normalized, and she no longer she struggled a lot. She used to pass out all the time. Not a good view. Because she was a supermarket manager a number of years back in. I mean, she's sort of in another type of management position now, but she was back then, and she was just passing out in the supermarket. I mean, not a good look. So yeah, she struggled with that, but I had no solution for her at the time. I was on a sad diet. This was years ago, and it's only when she got back to Australia and when the economy went to shit in Greece, got back here, lived with me. We reversed her basically her own structural asthma as well. So she had there's different types of asthma. There's not one type. There's, one type is a structural type, and that's what she had. And we've got a genetic SNP. I have, my father has, and all that. We require to get choline in our diet. If we don't get enough choline, we can't basically create enough sufficient lung surfactant. Without enough lung surfactant, we can't do proper gas exchanges. So we end up with asthma, bronchitis, and stuff like that. So it's, a lot of people are unaware they've got this genetic SNP and have this problem. And they think, and all the doctor does is give them basically if they did a genetic test and worked out that they have these genetic SNPs, and they knew, then they just supplement them choline if they're on a sad diet, or basically tell them to eat more meat, which is unlikely. So yeah, and that would fix the problem. And that's what my sister did. And she fixed the problem and goes, oh. And she says, when I get bored with eating too much meat, what do I do then? I'm eating fish and I'm not getting enough choline or whatever. I go, well, you can always eat more eggs or you can supplement. So she actually ended up eating more eggs rather than supplementing. So that's how she sorted her issue out in that regard. Because eggs are very high in choline, and it's a superfood actually. Yes. Yes. Simply Human, good to see you here, mate. Do you know of any cast iron skittle companies that don't pre-season with vegetable oil? No, mate, can't help you there. Yeah. If anybody else knows, I think Richard, you're a bit up to this sort of stuff over in New Zealand with this with the cast iron stuff. If you do know of any company, can you please pop it in the chat? Yeah, I don't. I mean, my utensils, pretty much I cook in stainless steel, glass, and ceramics. So basically, pottery type, the white type ceramic type things. And I've got glass ones as well, and I store most things in glass in the fridge. So I actually bought a little glass container recently as well with Hello Kitty, which was quite a nice little. So I'm using certain for snacks to take to work. So very helpful. But I'm trying to keep xenoestrogens down as much as possible, like keeping the plastics out of the, as you can understand. Yeah. So maybe Richard, maybe somebody else knows of a company, because I don't. Let me read How big are you? 5'8". Okay. Always start with 2 grams. Always. See how you feel. Take them at night. Take them in the evening, like with your evening meal. And the reason for that is because it brings down cortisol levels and amplifies melatonin. So you'll actually end up with better sleep in that regard. So that's one reason to start at night with 2 grams. If you're basically wanting to enhance your muscle protein synthesis, you're doing exercise, bodybuilding and stuff like that, it is a mild myostatin inhibitor. So sometimes some people will take 2 grams in the evening, and they'll take 2 grams before, like an hour before a pre-workout, or an hour and a half, to basically guarantee maximum saturation throughout the body. So between an hour to an hour and a half, you should, the bigger you are, obviously, you may need more time to saturate the body. So you can vary. I don't give a precise, I say to people, I'll leave it up to you to decide on that, but it can actually help in that regard. And it will improve your actual recovery as well. So it'll help with all that. Yeah. Well, in the daytime, if you take Lukey taurine, it shouldn't make you sleepy unless you've actually disturbed your sleep patterns in any way, your circadian rhythms. But in the evening, it will make you sleepy. So the more people take, sometimes people, because I've got a lot of stress levels, they tend to go, I'm really stressed out of my mind, I can't sleep. I'll say, well, take 6 grams in the evening. And I can tell you, they get to sleep, and their stress levels go down, and they calm. They go, oh yeah, they chill out. They got problems, but they've started to chill out, and they can tolerate anxious moments with their families, so to speak. So it depends. I usually start people at that low level, get the body to get used to it, because most people, if they eat a lot of animal foods, they will get anywhere between 0.5 to 1.5, maybe 2, if they eat a lot of seafood, grams per day. Okay. Now, the higher levels are more for therapeutic reasons. And the reasons why, I usually recommend to some people is because they may have a lot of sulfur depletion. They may have oxalates, which are depleting. They deplete a lot of taurine oxalates and a lot of the other sulfur amino acids, which isn't good for methylation. But that's for another day, another story. So there are also can be, mold exposure at work or home or whatever that can actually reduce your sulfur. There can be a number of other toxins and stuff like that can actually deplete your sulfur levels in your body, and so your requirements may go up. We don't live an ancestral life out in being earthed on the ground and out in the sun, and and having freshly slaughtered animals and stuff like that. We live a different life, so we do need to take these things into consideration in that regard. But I would say, as a starter, 2 and 2. Don't drink a lot of coffee, because if you drink a lot of coffee with taurine, it can magnify the effects in the low dosages, especially if it's 2 grams or less. If you're basically usually people have to go like double, like to 4 grams before they can actually overcome the effects of, and it depends on the people. Sometimes that's with slow methylators. If you're a fast methylator like I am, it makes no difference. It doesn't affect me at all, because I cleared caffeine out of my system very fast. So it depends on your genetics again, and I don't know your genetics, so I'm just giving it sort of a generalized coverage on that. I've done a video on insomnia and covering carnivore and insomnia in that regard, and there's also some videos in regards to medications. So like the key medications that I'm concerned about is blood pressure meds and lithium for people with neurological, because it does retain lithium. So you have to go and get your lithium adjusted down, and then slowly get off the lithium, because the pathways that lithium affects, taurine does as well, GABA. It increases GABA, it calms you down, it actually does all that sort of stuff. It's a much safer way, calming yourself down in an ancestral way, rather than with lithium or other medications. So anyway, but again, this is not medical advice. You need to go to a practitioner and get those things adjusted. So even with blood pressure meds, you need to go to your doctor and basically take small doses of taurine, then go and get your blood pressure meds adjusted. And that's why another reason why people, when they go on a carnivore diet, it's the taurine in the carnivore diet that actually brings down their blood pressure, normalizes a lot of those things. But if they're not getting enough, they may not get exactly, they may have a bit of disturbances and stuff like that. Supplemental a bit, or eating a bit of seafood that's got a bit more, tends to sort out that problem for them. So it depends. And it depends on, as I said, your antidiuretic hormones, the amount of fluids you're consuming. There's a number of factors at play. So it's not just one thing. So I would start at that base, and you could probably go up to 6 grams in, like 4 in the evening, or 3 and 3. You may want to do it like that if you're doing a lot of like weightlifting and stuff like that. I don't know exactly what you do with your life. So play around, see what sort of works for you. Okay. Everybody works some solution. Yeah, it drives you. It's bizarre that they would in the past it was all oiled by and seasoned with animal fats. It's just the modern world now. It's all vegetable oils. HD, good to see you, mate. This is a bit of an odd question. What's your opinion? Would be the ultimate means or factor to tamper with, enhance the brain? Future tech considered. I keep coming back to piezoelectrics. Well, I wouldn't want to put a piezoelectric in my brain. I can tell you that. I've seen piezoelectrics in, like ships, container ships behind, to sort of move them through the water, and all sorts of great engineering, microscopic ones that can actually, charge up devices, which could be potentially put inside the body. They could vibrate within piezoelectrically within the actual bloodstream, power the device, whatever. So it's probably where things may go with micro machines potentially, and that sort of stuff. But ultimately, the best food for the brain is actually the yolks of eggs. One of the best foods for the brain is the yolks of eggs, full of phospholipids, full of choline, full of taurine, full of all those phosphatidylserine, stuff like that. All these things that regulate the DNA that within the brain, that that actually have a lot of influence on neurotransmitters and all that sort of stuff, and are key components in building some of the major key critical building blocks of the actual brain. If you were really going to talk about a food to consume for your brain, it would be eggs in that regard. Or eating brains from another animal would be the ultimate in that regard. But, if they are not your cup of tea in that regard, obviously it depends on your ailment and conditions. I mean, we know that certain neurological diseases, from research on the Ashkenazi Jews in Tel Aviv, which actually showed that phosphatidylserine, like a phosphatidylserine supplement, can actually silence genes. But it does, I don't know how many eggs you'd have to consume to get the same amount in that regard. So you'd probably modulate some of those genes epigenetically, which would improve your brain function. but whether you could actually silence certain genes without, if you've basically got some of those genes that are affecting brain function, then you may need to consider supplemental high doses to turn those genes off. So I've got to eat a dozen eggs now. I knew that was going to happen. HD, you take things literally. Play around. You'll end up, it doesn't. It's a bit like that. That guy that 25 eggs a day, the old geezer, outlived his parents and everyone. Yep. Actually, and cholesterol is very important for the brain as well. So eggs are a very good source of cholesterol as well. Strap yourself in. You're welcome. Oops. I've randomly lost leg hair around my ankles. I'm 95% carnivore. I eat. Yep. Okay. You're getting enough meat there. 1 to 1.5 kilos, 6 eggs per day. Anything I can do to fix this or supplement and help this? Thank you. When it comes to hair or hair follicles, there can be a lot of things that can actually affect them. There can even be environmental things. So I don't know what your environment is like. That seems strange, all of a sudden, randomly, you just, that's like an exposure to something than anything else in that regard. I don't think your dietary doing anything, because you've been doing pretty much 95% carnivore, pretty much eating like this for some time. You just don't all of a sudden just lose, like, as you know, because my genetics with my hair. I used to have alopecia, balding throughout here. All this was, I had these bald spots and stuff like that. And I mean, now I'm putting enough protein back. But I did use another supplement, which was MSM. So, which is another sulfur amino acid, MSM, which tends to do it. Let me put it this way. You can supplement with taurine, but the problem with taurine is the cells of the body, you saturate evenly all over the place, and it sucks it in all over the place because it plays so many roles in the body. It gets overused for a whole lot of purposes, regulating this, regulating your gut, regulating your stomach. It just goes on and on. And so you end up with very little. And I found that I literally had to go like 4, way over 10. I didn't want to consume so much taurine. It was just ridiculous. And it just to basically thicken my hair. And I'm going, I've got to do something else. And then I came across MSM. And so now I just do 2 grams of MSM, and I've come back to 1 gram because I was doing 2 and my hair was becoming really thick. I mean, my barber was actually finding it difficult to cut through my hair, saying, bloody hell, Harry, your hair's thick. So I had to cut back. And it was a lady in the past. She actually was struggling as well, even worse. So Vin, she knows me. So she's and she was basically. She goes, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm taking extra because I was at the time. I think I was taking about 3 or 4 grams of MSM. And I ended up because it basically binds keratin. So it really builds your nails and it really builds your hair. And women that want to grow long hair, or men that want to grow long hair, or really strong nails, some women that want to grow like really big, strong nails out here, I usually get them to supplement MSM sulfur. So if you go to iHerb and you type in MSM Jarrow, you'll find, or one of the other companies, I do use a different one now in that regard. Let me just check. I think I may still have some in the drawer. I don't know whether I do, because I think I may have given it to Dad because he needs it for his knee and stuff like that. And he ran out. I used to do the Jarrow one in the past, and now I'm doing this one. So Dr. Best's MSM powder. So that's the one. That's the one that I'm doing now. But I only do a gram because I don't want my hair to become too thick because it's hard to brush and deal with, and it grows too fast then. And then I have to basically spend more money, and I don't like spending money. I'm a tight ass. I end up having to spend too much money. I don't like losing my hair either, because I had a lot of alopecia and all that. But if you get enough biotin, because biotin is very important for your hair as well, and you're not eating enough eggs, so you're getting enough bloody biotin. So that's not the issue. It just maybe something is depleting your sulfur, and this may be your option to basically get back some of that sulfur to build keratin and bind keratin in your hair and your nails. The downside is your nails will grow faster. You'll have to cut your nails more often. So I had to live with that. So, and that's another reason I cut back, because I was getting bored of constantly having to cut my nails more of it. But people that actually want to grow large, like women, large nails and stuff like that, yeah, it's fantastic for them. So, yeah. Anyway, let's move on. How much protein? It varies on your body size, how much. So it will vary between people. And you're talking about are you talking about an exercise after an exercise? Is that what you're talking about? So I would, I just basically look at the body regulates the amount. It doesn't really matter how much protein you consume. If you consume, I've discussed this before. If you consume, as long as if it's a supplement, that's a different thing altogether. So if you're talking about a supplement, I wouldn't go very high, probably 30 grams or 40 grams if it's a supplement. If it's just regular, because that will actually rush in very quickly. It's got low, my COVID thing still there. It'll actually go quite, it's got lower utilization, like 17%, like plant protein. And so, yeah, that's why I don't promote powders. And it'll rush into the amino pool, and you'll get more of it actually wasted, in a sense, either out of your feces or so it's not the best source in that regard. I prioritize meat and eggs and stuff like that. So I usually, if I'm going to do any training or whatever, I do it in a fasted way. All I take is L-citrulline, which is a vasodilator, and actually will allow me to exercise longer if I want to. Taurine, obviously, so I'll have a bit of post-recovery, and I'll be able to do a better workout. Then creatine as well, probably a couple of grams of creatine. And that's the sort of the three things that I basically put in as a pre, and then after that I just have regular food, and I'll have quite a bit of food, and it basically means that you'll slowly absorb. It'll go through your stomach, and your stomach may take a cut anywhere between 4 to 6 hours, to fully digest and all that, and slowly through the small intestine you'll have small amounts of release of these aminos coming through, and you absorb them in that middle part of the actual small intestine, and they will come through, and they will basically replenish the amino pool. And that's how this slow release moving through the gut, and slowly being, and gut motility can be regulated as long as you've got enough taurine in the gut cells to regulate the motility of the gut. That's what taurine does. It's a regulator of gut motility, and stomach motility and stomach acidity. So it does all that sort of stuff. It regulates the whole bloody lot. So if it brings things back to homeostasis. It's just a wonderful thing, which is great in actually the way it regulates the body. It's a Swiss Army knife for the body. So getting back to what I was saying, if you're eating real food, you will absorb it over a number of hours, and it's not an issue. The more you could eat to basically satiety, basically. And as long as you're eating to satiety, you'll slowly absorb that. If you want to prime to beef up a bit, you could spike it with a bit of with the combination of sometimes post meal. If I want to spike, I'll put in 2 grams of taurine plus 3 grams of leucine, and to get more of an anabolic effect in that regard. So you can do that as well, depending on the foods that I eat. If I eat less beef and I'm eating certain other meats that may have less leucine content, that's when I would have used that in particular. I gave my leucine to Dad, so I've got none at the moment, so that's fine. He needs it more than me as an old fella. So, and the other reason is for the taurine is because it's a mild myostatin inhibitor, so it actually amplifies the leucine effect on muscle protein synthesis. So, but let's not go crazy. There's a rate limiting because it's a regulator. It'll only do a bit. It won't, adding more taurine ain't going to get more inhibition of myostatin. So don't have those crazy thoughts. I'm going to have a whole lot of powders. Not going to work. You'll get some effect, but there's a rate limiting effect. So don't go crazy on that side. After a few months, Carnivore, all my concerns with regards to what I believe were electrolyte issues were resolved. Exactly. Most people, if they're getting enough meat, because you're eating quite a bit of meat, you should technically get enough taurine. If you supplement on top, you're definitely going to get enough, and that will regulate all the electrolytes, and it's a non-issue. I'm the same. I don't have any leg cramps or any of that sort of issues that go away. I used to have some terrible bloody, cramps when I was doing keto. Oh, God. I used to stretch my legs out and I go, oh, I was in agony, absolute friggin' agony. And all I could think is, I need more electrolytes. And I packs and packs of electrolytes. It's ridiculous. Look back at those days and I go, God almighty, how do I get sucked into that nonsense? A lot of us did, so. Yes. Tribal people don't undereat protein. They kill an animal and they go to they have a party. They eat the fat and muscle of that animal, and they really enjoy it. Something that we need to learn in the modern world, something where we've been brainwashed so much to fear protein and fat, animal fat in particular. And some of us, even though some of us came into the low carb community and stopped fearing fat, we still fear protein. And there's a lot of nonsense in the low carb community about mTOR. It's all bloody nonsense. I've done a number of videos covering that, even in my cancer stuff, talking about meat and cancer. So there's a playlist if anybody wants to go and check it out. You don't have to have cancer. You can still learn something from those videos. It is specifically designed for those people because I'm trying to help them, but the rest of you can learn something from them as well. And I get more watch time, which is good for me. Anyway, well, there's got to be a motive, something in it for myself. More watch time. Not that I get much from YouTube. I think on one, I actually showed Llama once, and it was only a couple of cents, and I said that's all I got from that one. He goes, oh, well, that's YouTube for you. Unless you're a big, raking in the income for them, they don't really care for the small guy, and don't even promote the small guy. It's only been recently, I think they've taken the pedal off the censor slightly because they're fearing losing people. They're cagey at the moment, the other social media companies. They're sort of, and I've noticed I've actually grown since Elon Musk was talking about Twitter and all that. I've known my growth in the last has been much more dramatic. More people have got to know me. And these people are not even subscribing to some of the other channels that I've got in my featured channels, people that don't even know my featured channels that are coming to me and then potentially subscribing to some of my featured channels. So it's quite interesting what has happened. And that's sort of happened. I suspect that they've taken the pedal off the censor. I don't think they've completely removed it, but I say they've taken it slightly off because they are fearful of potentially losing people. And, when the companies that actually do a lot of the advertising on their channels and stuff like that start seeing potentially there may be more money over there if there are more people creeping over there, there's the risk of some advertising dollars to move elsewhere to other platforms, and that's why they're becoming they've taken the pedal off. It's ridiculous. I've had like 3 or 4 of my last videos, out of my last 6 videos, basically demonetized, immediately demonetized. And I couldn't actually work out what it was. And then guess what I did? I actually complained about every single one. The first couple that I actually complained about, I just put, I had to change the date, the scheduled date continually, so it wouldn't go live. And then they they took like 4 or 5 days to reply. Then I came up with a novel idea and I said, okay, let's just go outside. They say 7 days. I put a scheduled day of 8 days. Guess what happened? The next day, the last 2 videos, the next day, they basically monetized them immediately. Because basically I scheduled it right out there. So immediately they responded. So I don't know why they frustrate people that way, or the AI set up like that to basically make you, damn it, I'll just post it. They're not going to reply. I'm just going to post it, bugger them. But when I actually put it outside the limit, which is 7 days to 8 days, immediately the next day, monetized. Very damn annoying. But I know that how to work around the AI now on that front, which is really basically annoying. But anyway, it's easy. I do that, and the moment they remonetize me the next day, I just goes live immediately. So, yes, Phoenix compilation. Good to see you, mate. So I've been having a bit of fun with YouTube. What's new? Some of the Russian research in the area of neuropeptides looks promising, especially neurological issues, increasing BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, as it's called, significantly. Deuterium depletion. Deuterium depletion goes back to, as I told you guys, goes back to the 1960s research. With that seems interesting. Yeah, look, a lot of the peptides, because peptides are basically when you have a small amount of amino acids stuck together, that's like a small protein. That's a peptide, just for anyone that doesn't know what a peptide is. So these neuropeptides can be modulated by a number of nutrients in animal foods. So do we and all the actual amino acids, when you eat a carnivore diet, you get shitloads of these amino acids. And as long as you're getting the cofactors for the enzymes to be able to then build these neuropeptides, then you're good to go. And generally, I've done a bit of a rundown when it comes to, unless you're on a diet that's not a carnivore diet, only then are you, g'day, Lukey, only then are you insufficient in building enough of these proteins and structures within the body. So it's usually insufficient protein rather than anything else. So if you give the body enough protein, it's like, even dealing with homocysteine. If anybody hasn't seen my video where I take the mickey out of Gregor on homocysteine, Lukey's seen it's funny. I mean, initially I had a few serious moments. And then I go on to really becoming comical and saying, look, he's saying it himself, because just admitting that, all the brain fog, neurological disorders and all these problems due to B12, but it's not. And then I actually show quite clearly in some of the research about methionine, and the importance of methionine, the importance of basically, they were actually supplementing methionine, and homocysteine was going down, not up, but was going bloody down, and the complete opposite what the actual argument out there has been for a long time. Our biggest problem is that for a very long time, our species has been degenerating, becoming shorter, becoming weaker, becoming, losing a lot of its ancestral strengths that it had. Our brains shrunk in the last 20 plus thousand years by 10%. And that was towards, because you had Cro-Magnon man that was 10% larger, the early Homo sapiens. And so we ended up with what we call Homo sapiens sapien, which basically means this reduced brain-sized modern human, which has 10% smaller brain size. And that happened as a consequence of this interglacial period becoming warmer, animals becoming leaner, less fat on the animals, and as a consequence, we were forced into supplementing seasonally sugar to engage the Randle cycle and fatten up and produce fat stores through Randle cycle activation by mixing sugar and fats in that seasonal, at the end of summer, early autumn, when most fruit is available, pretty much. So fructose and fat in combo is something that somebody now recommends who considers themselves I consider themselves a bizarre, well, we call him, we've got a number of names, wrap boy, salad boy, a whole lot of things that we call him. Yes. So yes, how can you call him? He's basically now down in Costa Rica. So basically we could call him. I'll have to come up with some better name. Let me think about that. I'll put my thinking cap on. Hey, Jared's here. G'day, Jared. You want to come on? Let me know. I'll send you a link if you do.
Yes.
You may be able to inform us about what's happening in Canada. Yes, his close and dear friend Trudeau has been basically fisting the entire Canadian population, taking away their money when they disagree with him. He's basically locking them up when they disagree with him, and now he wants to basically limit their right to even free speech. He's what a leader to have. What an absolute great leader to have.
Such an example.
Oh, an exemplary person, and then he lectures the Russians about human rights. That was the funniest part.
Oh, God.
Talk about the pot calling the kettle black.
The first time I saw
I just said something inappropriate as well. It's probably the woke meter will be probably activated by using that sort of language. I can see that happening. I'm in trouble, Lukey. You should have warned me.
I'm sorry, it's hard enough to keep up with the condemned language in my own native language, and then I have to keep up with it in English as well. I'm like, oh wait, I shouldn't say this or this.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy. I think I may have to get like a little bulletin board here, just a board where I've got all the woke words and non-woke words, and sort of just to make sure that I'm basically compliant with YouTube, just in case I slip up and all that. And then the right apologies to give as well. See, I'm not really versed in this sort of stuff. Being a middle-aged man, nearly 56. Being too old, I'm just, I'm a dinosaur, a fossil, as I would be characterized nowadays.
Harry, there's this funny bit actually. So recently there has been a wave of people like making. So people going woke on certain words we have in Portuguese. So we have a word for like a nightstand or a bed table, where you usually have your alarm clock. and it's called criado mudo, which means a mute servant, basically.
Okay.
And it comes from slavery times, because people
Yeah,
would
yeah,
have like a slave near their bed. They wouldn't say anything, and he was just there, or he or she was just there to maybe give them some water or something. And they are saying, so now people are going away and say, oh, you can't call it criado mudo anymore, you have to say something else.
yeah.
It's like, and I'm like, people have always said that. What is going to change? No one is being slave anymore. It doesn't
Exactly.
make any
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Oh god.
I mean, most of the population of Brazil has a bit of slave blood in them, so to speak.
Exactly.
So it's a ridiculous, and they use it. All of them use it. So it's ridiculous. It gets to the sort of ridiculous level in society. It's just it's beyond a joke in that regard. So and I mean I even get into trouble with some people, younger people, and I'm going, I'm actually, I'm ethnic. I'm making fun of myself sometimes, and because maybe I don't look too ethnic to them or whatever, they have a go at me, and I'm going, look, because I do some like Greek gags and comical about Greek shop owners and stuff like that and whatever. My father was a Greek shop owner, and I get really some funny looks by some people, and all that, and I go, my dad was, I'm Greek, full blown, 99.1%. I could even prove it genetically, So, bugger off. God almighty, people are sensitive nowadays. It's just ridiculous, the level.
It's
But what can you
absurd.
say? Yeah, look,
Yeah.
I basically, even some of the Anglos, I've I've got like the Kiwis, call them Kiwis, and all sorts of other deranged things that we use, and they call us two-headed monsters down here in Tassie that we inbreed with our, So we've got all these sort of things, and it's not nasty. It's just basically something that we've always, it's a joke and stuff like that. Nobody takes it serious, but God Almighty. Some of the younger ones now, because they've been brought up in this very insular type things, they listen to this and you see them, they give you the filthiest look, like you killed their grandmother or something. You just ridiculous, it's just yes. But I was
Pure
just going to say to
insanity.
HD, you don't need any of these peptides, and unfortunately some of them can have other things, substances in them, and can be problematic to your brain chemistry. Not a good thing. I would not advise them. But some of the research in Russia is really good, and but some of the products, that's a different thing altogether. And you can actually get the same sort of improvements and effect on a carnivore diet with a few mild biohacks with choline, taurine, and stuff like that, and eating more eggs. Pretty much, eggs are like a lot of yolks and stuff like that. I sometimes will, down 6 or 7, maybe sometimes even more, just raw egg yolks, because I don't like the whites. I throw the whites away. I know I don't actually throw it. I usually make it into an omelette with bacon and stuff like that, and and 1 or 2 eggs of additional eggs, so there's a bit of color in there. But so I don't throw them out. I don't, yeah, but I don't like them raw. The yolks, sorry, the
Yeah.
whites.
Yeah. What?
The whites, just, I don't know, the way they go down my throat. The I just don't like it really. It's just slimy. It's the way, where egg yolks, I don't mind. I can even crush them in my mouth. I don't mind them. I like the taste of egg yolks, but not the whites in raw form. It's just me. So
Yeah, it's interesting. It does seem to me that cats, they seem to like the yolks, but not the egg whites as well. The raw egg whites.
yeah. It's a so yeah. It's not only me. Everybody's got their favorite salt. It's Redmond's.
Oh god, I'm still using just regular refined salt. I haven't bothered to look for a whole salt that I can
Well,
trust.
I use a lake salt in Australia, which is from Western Australia, and it's a very it's got a lot of minerals, trace minerals, so it's really good. Another thing is it doesn't come from the sea, so it has no microplastics potentially.
Mhm.
It doesn't come from like being mined, Himalayan salts and all that.
Yep.
So there is a lot of other heavy metals that can be in those. This is a sort of like a renewable. Every season it sort of rebuilds. These salt beds rebuild, so they're very good. And then there's a salt bed in Western Australia. There's a river there that basically that also has a really nice. That one is a really nice if you want, because it actually is in flakes. So you buy it in flakes,
Oh,
and you can. It's got like a sweetness to it because of the mineralization. It's really nice. So depending on this type of food you want, if you want to basically, well, if you want to give the food a bit of that um, less bitter, or a bit of a sweetness to it, it's a really nice salt to use. And then I also, for iodine, I use regular sea salt, iodinized sea salt, which I occasionally use, a bit here and there. Just, I mean, I get iodine from from other sources like eggs and other sources, obviously animal foods, but I add a bit here and there just to basically make sure that so I don't have to go out of my way to guarantee the sort of levels. But that's pretty much it. It's probably because I'm consuming slightly more eggs and I'm getting a slightly higher level of selenium. I like to balance the two a bit better when I'm running higher levels. So, do you think any benefits from taking dietary supplements if you consume raw kefir? Yeah, I think there is. That's because that specific supplement has specific strains that suppress things like C. diff and a number of other pathogenic bacteria very effectively. So it's not for everyone. It's only really if you've actually got C. diff or got certain pathogenic bacteria that you've tested yourself. That's when you really need to. I wasn't really sure because I didn't test myself, but I just decided to use it for a number of months, for about 6 months. My brother Sean and Kim, they both did as well, and they ended up with great results as well. And everybody else that's tried it, and also people that have tried it and getting some of the lactobacillus strains into the kefir as well. What they've found is they've been able to become dairy tolerant again, which was quite a bit of a shock for a lot of people. They thought they were intolerant. Because nobody checks their genetics like I do, or a few people do. So once they did the kefir for a number of months, then bang, everything changed. They could tolerate milk. They were shocked. So yes, so you never know. You may get surprised. It is a mythic location, irreversible. Who's actually saying that it's not irreversible? Don't know. I'm aware that taurine and cysteine from eggs yolks can neutralize glycation. Yep, they have that effect. There's a number of other. It's not only. There's a number of other amino acids that also have that effect as well. So, carnosine has that effect as well. Even methionine has a slight reduction in glycating effect as well, because it is a sulfur amino acid, so it does have that effect as well. So yeah, all the sulfur amino acids tend to. Probably the only difference between all of them is taurine, for one reason and only for one reason in that regard. It actually, when you actually get a lot of glycation of proteins, what happens is it can actually distort their protein folding. Out of all these, only taurine can actually refold proteins properly. Now, there are enzymes in your body that can do that, but there is a rate limiting of how much they can do. taurine does it as a bonus. So, so you can actually end up with more correctly corrected folded proteins. Let me just say that tongue twister thing correctly. And as a consequence, you can actually end up with, because aging is misfolded proteins. A lot of aging, dementia, Alzheimer's, there's a lot of misfolded proteins in the brain. So, yeah, you want to talk about a neuroprotective, forget about neuropeptides. You want to really talk about a neuroprotective substance? Well, there it is, taurine. It's in meat and a number of other animal foods. That's the reason why people actually get better and have better brain function under a carnivore diet. That's the reason. You're sleepy. You didn't get enough sleep. Were you working flat out today?
No, Harry, I'm fine. My eyes are a bit heavy because we actually have.
Because you're in the evening there. You didn't know.
It's an evening,
How much taurine did you take in the evening?
It was like 6 grams.
Oh, no wonder you're starting to.
No, yeah, but there's something else going on as well. We have a new sofa, and I think it's giving me an allergic reaction. My eyes are sticking a bit. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So we have been airing it out, but it's still smelling like new.
Some sort of chemical.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. Look, that will deplete sulfur as well. So, and that'll also, taurine will be, another sulfur amino acids like methionine and all that will be used to detox that sort of stuff out of your system. So you're on the right diet for it if you're being exposed to certain things. But try and open the window more often and try to vent.
Yeah, I've been doing that. My friends are actually annoyed at me. They're like, "Why are you doing this? The wind's coming. There's like such a strong wind coming." I'm like, "Look at the smell on this thing."
Hey, just remind your friends, you're in the bloody tropics, mate. I mean, God. I can understand if you're in some place like 40 degrees south, like I am in Hobart, where when it blows here and it's winter, I can tell you it's cold.
Yep.
I'm the only nut that's me and my brother Sean, the only nut that will walk with me in a blizzard. So everyone else tends to be at home because they're normal people. Oh well, normal and dying much faster, something like that along those lines. Harry, do you think the main cause of cataracts can be reversed? Yes, I do believe that it can, but it takes time. It's much harder because the lens doesn't actually get it doesn't have the blood supply in the same way other tissues have, and it's like degenerative bones. Once that gets started and you've got a lot of crystallization from oxalates inside the bones or other damage, it's much harder to you can stabilize it, but much harder to reverse it in that regard. But advanced glycation end products, glycation, of the eye is what is driving a lot of this sort of stuff. Now, you can actually improve the health of the eye by being on a carnivore diet, and obviously taurine and other sulfur amino acids can also help there as well. Choline can also help a bit in an indirect way, but ultimately, potentially a product like Cerule, which is a stem cell type product as well, could help. But it's very hard to say. It depends on how bad, Bruce Lee, your cataract situation is or not. Oh
yes,
gosh.
yeah, I was going to say.
I forgot. Okay, sorry. I'm just about to.
Amateur hour.
Yeah, something along those lines. I forgot to tell you, Trudeau sent me a message and said, "Don't let that joker on. Whatever you do, don't let that joker on." Do you realise I'm going to be in trouble with your illustrious leader? You've only got yourself to blame. Oops.
Yeah, just put a disclaimer. The opinions here stated are those of the the guests.
Exactly. My dear, close and loving friend Trudeau, the following guest that will appear speaks for himself. You know, it's not basically the views of this specific channel.
Yes.
He's a milk rustler as well, you know, but my channel is not involved in those sort of activities either.
Yeah, we're not harboring any dairy criminals over.
Exactly. Come on, cream boy, come on. I've sent you the damn link.
Oh God.
G'day, Scotty. How are you, mate? Morning, folks. Just a brief listen while waiting to head out to a cheesy factory shop. Oh, that sounds good. Stanthorpe. Later on near lunch. Fair enough. Just a brief holiday in Queensland, Granite Belt region. Okay. I know the area. Have fun. Enjoy the cheeses. I know you're going to have a very cheesy day. HD 134 minus points from your social credit score. Back to Greece. I'm going to be deported. See what happens?
Oh
See,
God.
I bring Jared on, and you know. Yes, they can't get rid of me, HD. I was born in Australia, so under the Constitution, if you're born in Australia, you know that is, you are an Australian citizen. If you're if you're foreign-born national and then become naturalised, then you do something illegal and inappropriate, then they can deport you back to your country of origin. Well, this government does now, apparently, but yes. So, oops, I'll move through your stuff. Already discussed this, and I harassed you about it as well. Well, not severely enough. I should have done a better job. You know, if I've got to have my guests on, I should give them a hard time at least.
Oh God! But I do have to say it's been really helpful because my first 2.5 months at the new job, I was like a pile of like loose wires.
Oh yeah, I remember you telling me that.
Oh God, it was so tough. Finally starting to feel good about it though.
Yes. What causes socially inept children and speech impediments? Well, species inappropriate diet would do that, definitely. I've had a number of people that, look, there's a lot of things, you know, where do we start? Our culture, to a large extent, does not incentivize young people to take responsibility for a lot of things. It's an unfortunate thing, but it's the reality. I was basically working for my father from the age of 10 years of age. Yeah. Yes. You're an indentured servant to the Serpanos family until you become an adult. So that was my first work. I used to do quite a lot. You know, I'd like in the morning before I went to school, I'd have to, you know, stack the shelves and put stuff in and go outside. I'd get up very early and we'd start the potato peeler and throw all the potatoes in. And they, you know, for fish and chips, they cut all the potatoes. They come out into a sort of container, and then you take each one of them, you put them through this device which cuts the chips and it makes it into. It's got like a grid type thing that cuts them, force them through, and you because in those days you didn't buy ready ones made. This is back in the 70s. We cooked everything in tallow, beef tallow dripping. You know, it was in animal foods. There was no seed oils back then, luckily. So when we were in the business, you know, and then a few years later we went overseas to Greece. That's where I did my high school. But as a youngster, when I was in my primary school, that's where I was. You did your stock take, you did all that sort of stuff when you came back, and then you went and did your homework. So it was very different way. G'day, mate. How's it going?
Hey, guys. Oh, I scared eggs by talking.
Typical Canadian with his pussy.
She's
yeah,
very skittish.
I'm going to be very inappropriate because I'm a Tasmanian, and I'm a Tasmanian devils are all inappropriate.
Look, Harry, I wasn't going to pop on the stream this evening, but I got offended when you said that apparently it's cold in Australia in the wintertime.
Oh, that's true. There is a thing called snow in Canada. Yes. Blizzard, snow.
I can't stay for too long, but I'll pop on and say hi.
That's good. That's good.
I don't have my glasses on because I just got home from driving anyway, so my sleep's already going to be messed up.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Besides, when's the last time the chat saw my beautiful face?
Oh, well, it's been a while. It's been a while. He's having his raw milk there.
I am.
God, you must be bloody happy.
Wait. What time is it?
Mm-hmm. It's time to shut up, Luke.
I think Loki's trying to point out some circadian mismatch.
Yeah, listen, I just drove like a 3-hour round trip for this, so I'm gonna enjoy some while it's fresh.
I would be doing exactly the same.
You are excused.
I'd be getting one of those big flutes. Remember those big flutes in the old days? They used to fill them up with alcohol and drink them, skull them. I'd be doing something like that. Do it in style, mate. Do it in style.
Oh god!
If I could get one that, like, instead of being shaped like a boot, it's like a cow's udder or something.
Oh, that's right.
Oh god!
Even better. And doing it online, God, can you imagine how many vegans would be trolling you right after that? Oh, we found a cow rapist online. You'd be basically trolled to hell. Oh, and on top of that, you may get a call from your illustrious leader. I've been hearing you've been doing something inappropriate online, Mr. Jared.
Yeah, me and Justy are good friends.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. It's always pleasant. I'm not associated with this person, please. Just letting YouTube know. It's good to have you here, mate. So what's been happening in your neck of the woods beyond milk rustling and stuff like that? What's the Canadian people been up to, and your illustrious leaders' misadventures?
Yeah, there was a small political rally today at the legislature that I attended because Maxime Bernier, the only politician in Canada who's voiced opposition to the pandemic restrictions the entire time, is driving around the country because he can't fly, because Canada is a free country where you're not allowed to leave unless you undergo certain medical interventions, and that includes flying domestically, unfortunately. Anyway, so he was in town, so I went to shake his hand and tell him I appreciate his voice in the political spectrum.
Yeah, look, I would, if I was around, I'd be doing the same. You don't have to agree with everything people say, but when they take a stand on freedom, on free speech and stuff like that, you've got to acknowledge, and it doesn't matter who they are, which, from which side of the political side they come from, or you are as a person, you've got to respect people taking a stand and saying, forcing people to take medical interventions against their will is a violation of human rights.
Precisely.
Simple as that. It's not basically, it's not politics. It's not left or right or center politics. It is a violation of human rights. No government in history has ever forced the population to take a medical intervention. Mm-hmm. I mean, even doctors are not permitted. They need to get your authorization to basically do even surgery on your body, or some person who can actually, on behalf of you, give authorization, like a relative or something like that, if you're unconscious or whatever. Yes. And the other thing is, it's like, Jehovah's Witness. They can deny, they can say, look, I'm not taking blood. If I die, I die. If I don't, it's,
the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has a preamble before the entire charter that often gets disregarded, or people find it problematic, I guess, because it has a certain 3-letter word in it. And it says, whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And what they mean by that is the importance of your natural rights.
Yep, exactly.
People will object to the fact that it says God in there, but it's meant to establish that the government does not grant you rights, that you have these rights, and
Exactly.
then all else, everything else follows
given by God. Exactly.
Yes.
Your free will, your rights to basically decide the way you live your life. You know.
And certain political leaders don't seem to think that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms means very much for Canada anymore. So that's actually, there's like an entire lawsuit going on right now around that. We'll see what happens with it. So they're specifically suing the government for the violation of mobility rights, because that's the easiest one to prove in court.
Yep.
But pretty well all of them have been systematically violated in some way.
Yeah, it's always hard because obviously free speech is a very murky area in law to basically prove in that regard. And that's why I've even said, when it comes to things like YouTube, you don't go and take YouTube on legally on the basis of free speech. You take them on that they are commercially affecting you negatively, because it's like having an online store that you're renting off them. That's what your channel is. It's sort of a platform and all that. It's no different than being in a shopping center and having an outlet. Well, the difference is it's an outlet with cross advertising. That's the only difference, and that's what you agree with. But other than that, you're the content producer. What you're producing is your business. That's what it was initially. They changed those conditions, and it's no different than, just because something's not physical, it doesn't mean that your rights are less in the way you conduct your business within that place.
So I touched on this a couple of months ago on a stream with you and Bart, but Section 1 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, this is specific to Canada, of course,
obviously,
is being willfully misinterpreted by the Trudeau government to justify disregarding every other right that's in the Charter. So the first thing the Charter says after that preamble, actually I can read it from the start because the first sentence is in it.
Do that.
Whereas Canada is founded upon the principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, the first item on it, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably phrasing's different, demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Trudeau is taking that to mean that your rights only extend as far as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So he's saying your right to free speech only goes as far as it doesn't encroach on someone else's right to whatever, or your right to medical autonomy or bodily autonomy only extends so far as it doesn't jeopardize someone else's right to their body.
Well, let's put it this way.
The thing is,
first of all, it makes no difference of basically contracting. It's been proven it's a coronavirus, and whether you're jabbed or not, you can still transmit. You can still get it.
Right.
So it nullifies that whole argument.
But not only that,
haven't people pointed that out to him?
It's incorrect, his interpretation. The last living signatory who drafted the charter and was involved in the processes of establishing Section 1 has come out, and it is one of the people leading a lawsuit against him.
Okay.
And he's saying that no, Section 1 does not limit your rights. Section 1 says the limits on your rights can only be as is reasonably and demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society.
So basically, you don't have the right to kill another person. You don't have the right to basically bash another person. That sort of stuff. That's the sort of interpretation. Nothing to do with medical stuff or anything like that. That this guy's extrapolating from. It's basically those common sense, abuses of, where you're you basically presume that you've got more rights over others in a sense. But that's the sort of the limitation where he's basically putting down stuff that's spurious, because medical stuff was never part of any charter anywhere in the world. Never has been. I mean, it's the reason why we've never had, even in the polio epidemics, the influenza epidemics, all the different epidemics that we've had in the past, and we've had plenty of them, there have never been any sort of restrictions or mandates in a sense in the way this time has happened. So
yeah. So we'll see if these lawsuits go forward. It seems pretty clear cut that any justice of the court that understands a constitutional law in Canada anyway should see it that way. But it's they're very beholden to the government as well. They're paid by the government, literally.
I think having the person that was actually one of the people that were involved in the actual charter would give a lot of weight for them to disagree with the actual, like the fathers of the document. It'd be like in America, the Supreme Court, disagreeing and saying that the founding fathers who set some of the parameters of the Constitution down of the US were wrong. I mean, it would be. Most people consider that completely and utterly outrageous from the courts to say something like that. And conservative courts tend to not behave like that. So I would hope in that situation that they would uphold. But, in today's world, crazy things have happened.
Yeah, that's right.
But I would be shocked if they didn't uphold,
We'll see. I'm hopeful. His name is Brian Peckford. He was the premier of Newfoundland at the time.
Okay.
He's the last living person who could do this, apart from Queen Elizabeth. So,
okay, so it's really just those founders and Queen Elizabeth, nobody else that could challenge on the basis, because they were part of the document and then the royal assent of the document, obviously.
That's right.
So that's okay. So obviously, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think that I would find it extremely surprising if it went against him. Extremely surprising, but other crazier things have happened. But it would be great to see somebody like Trudeau get it kicked in a good kick, a good hiding from the from the highest legal authority within the country.
His approval ratings are terrible right now.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, keep in mind Trudeau is ruling on about 20% of the vote because of our first past the post system and his minority government. So,
are there people calling for new elections?
Well, the thing is that the minority government initially was kind of hopeful, but we've already had like 3 elections in the last 5 years, something like that, because they keep having non-confidence votes, and needless to say, it's very expensive for the parties every time they have to run an election. So the Liberals, knowing this, went to the NDP, the other left-leaning party, and said, "Look, if you don't support us, we're going to make it a confidence vote." So they basically just bent them over a barrel and said, "We know you can't afford another election. You will lose seats if you don't agree with us. So do what we want."
They blackmailed them.
Yep. And the leader, Jagmeet Singh, who along with Trudeau were both part of that the youth program for the WEF, which isn't suspicious at all.
Yeah, exactly.
They have now formed a coalition government in this, this great bipartisan effort that's clearly not at all just a gun to the head of the NDP, basically, right? And so right now, I think there's more justified vitriol against Jagmeet Singh than against Trudeau, because Singh is the one who's actually enabling the
but he's been blackmailed. He's been blackmailed. This is how funny, how these manipulative bastards, how they redirect the anger elsewhere. People sometimes need to wise up and realize that this is a small party. They're under pressure, and it's really Trudeau who's actually doing the blackmailing here.
Yeah.
you
But
know? So
that
anyway,
being said, it's not like I have a lot of hope for the Conservatives to save Canada either, because basically all of the pandemic restriction issues that were put to vote in Parliament
they were supporting them as well.
were supported unanimously by Parliament.
Yeah.
And I don't ever
Yeah.
want to see unanimous votes on, especially on important issues, but really any
Exactly.
issue. There's no excuse for a unanimous vote ever, because if you're
No.
voting unanimously, then someone's not asking the right questions.
Exactly. You know, it's quite absurd that well, yeah, there's only a very few people in that party and very few people, any independents that basically are taking a stance against some of this sort of stuff or not.
I don't. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think there are any. You're putting me on the hot seat here. I don't remember if there are any independent MPs in
Okay.
Parliament right now. There might be one. I don't
Okay.
think so. The Maxime Bernier, who I went to see today, is basically the only party that's not affiliated with that same ideology.
Yep.
But they don't have any seats right now. They did have one seat and lost it.
Okay. So yeah, so pretty yeah. Look, it's a difficult situation. I think at the end of the day, the only thing that Canadians can be hopeful for is that your highest court will find that the government, you know, acted unconstitutionally in this regard. And you know, and basically then once that hits the media and all that, what will happen is most of the other parties will try to distance themselves, not because they weren't complicit in this, but because now they just want to let Trudeau basically take the cake, so to speak. The whole
Well, the
you know what,
Conservatives are currently the Conservatives repealed. They recalled their leader, which is great. Their leader was Aaron O'Toole, who ran on a very, very, very diluted conservative platform. And I don't say that necessarily as a conservative. I say that as one who wants to see strong opposition in the House.
Yep.
And their platform was more or less indistinguishable from the left-leaning, the Liberal platform.
Yep.
They agreed on all of the issues. It was just a matter of degree of how they disagreed. So it was,
Yes.
they all wanted carbon tax. It was just a matter of how much
Yep.
carbon tax, that kind of thing,
How
right?
much? Yeah.
So there's a leadership race going on for the Conservatives right now that's getting quite a lot of media attention. And
Okay.
the front runner of the leadership race is Pierre Poilievre. And he is basically just taking a page from Maxime Bernier's platform, trying to draw votes that Conservatives had lost to the People's Party. But the thing is, again, Poilievre is great for asking questions and being critical. I think that he's producing really good sound bites. He definitely has made Trudeau look bad on several occasions, and he gets a lot of support and views for that reason. But he's been in Parliament the whole pandemic. He's been there the whole time, and only just now has started speaking out against these things.
Well, maybe that,
meaning. And again,
maybe
there
they're
were all
real.
these unanimous votes that were already passed that he was there for.
Exactly.
So I don't see him as the savior.
No. Look, I understand what you mean, but what may happen is, especially when is this legal sort of case supposed to basically be finalized? Is there a
I'm not sure.
okay? Because if that's before the next election,
I
and
imagine it will have some. It'll definitely have progress before the next election.
Yeah.
The next election won't be until 2025. So
so in 3 years' time, which pretty much means that, and most of the other political parties aren't sort of not interested at this moment of pulling the plug.
Right, and Trudeau effectively
as you
has
said,
the majority to railroad whatever he wants until then.
Yeah, and so precisely. So there's no incentive for them. All they're doing is just buying for time and building their stocks up for that time, on their front. But also they could potentially get a boost, and then they may make a shift away from those policies because they realize, well, the highest court makes a decision that this is unconstitutional. I think they'll probably, even though they were involved, many of them, they'll run away from Trudeau and let him hold the baby, so to speak.
Maybe.
So I think that may play out like that, and that may get rid of this person. But at the same time, as you said, there are still questionable people on all sides of politics that are basically still have a number of agendas, woke agendas and other things.
It's really
very problematic.
It's really remarkable how many different angles that you see the same ends trying to be achieved from. It's really, I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but it feels that way.
It's like in Australia as well. Most of the political parties, they more or less agree on most of these things. It's just the degrees of difference. It's not as if they're, it's only the United Australia Party and a couple of other independents that actually have clearly, differentiated themselves from the major political parties in this country. So, first time in our history that we've got an entity which is actually getting some traction within the political sphere in Australia that may, let's say, upend the system and create a minority government which won't be able to easily maneuver their current agendas. But we'll see. It's hard to know. Because I usually say, many people say, oh, God, you need majority government. If you've got minority government, it's going to be chaos. That's only chaos that media like to play up. Actually, government is run by the bureaucracy, just letting you know. It's not run by politicians. It's run by the bureaucracy.
The public are very much under the spell of the media, unfortunately.
Yeah. But it's a bureaucracy. Take a look at Belgium, for instance. They didn't have a government for 1 or 2 years, and actually, it was the only time in their history that the public service actually made them a surplus. Because there was no politicians there to pork barrel.
Yeah.
That was the only reason, and they actually made a surplus, and they actually ran the government better than with zero politicians. Improving things and actually, services and making a surplus. There's your funny thing. So people need to realize that we need other voices in Parliament. There shouldn't be basically one uniform vanilla type and nothing else, because that's when you get draconian, authoritarian approaches and rubber stamping of things without anyone basically disagreeing or anybody basically, assessing the stuff. If people don't look at the stuff and don't argue, the faults of a piece of legislation, and everybody just rubber stamps, you end up with really bad legislation and bad law, which can affect people's lives in a number of ways. Yeah.
Well, there was that clip of Klaus Schwab saying, basically bragging about how much of Canada's government has been compromised by, WAF interests, and it was an older clip, but the relevance of it was only just recently realized by the public, sort of thing. And I forget, there was an MP in Parliament who said that his constituents had been voicing concern over this and that they wanted an answer about it. And the thing is that for the pandemic, they have a lot of MPs sitting remotely. Many of them have not had the jab because you have to have it to be in the house in person. And so you can watch it by video. You can watch these video conferences being live streamed and such, right, on a channel on YouTube called CPAC. And this guy gets on and asks this question specifically of Trudeau, saying like, what's with all of this WAF affiliation with your cabinet? Can you please address this? And the Speaker of the House interrupts him and says, "Oh, we're having some technical issues. Oh, we couldn't hear the question. It sounded like he was posing a really good question there, but we're just going to move on." So first he says he can't hear it, then he says it sounded like a good question, and then they just completely disregard it. But not only that, but the recording that you see of this event happening, the audio is being passed through to the stream from the house. So if you can hear the guy on the stream asking the question, it had to have been audible in the house.
Exactly.
So, and people throw their hands up and get frustrated and start calling, alleging conspiracy here, and they get completely disregarded in the government funded media.
It's a big problem at the moment with a lot of that. It's even, it's happening in Australia. It's happening in a number of countries where things, even the general media, I've noticed even in Australia, occasionally when I do take a look, they deliberately will just show a piece of what somebody says, not the whole lot, and then they will comment on it as if that is to literally just turn things upside down. And when you go back to the actual source, you realize actually that person was making a valid point. and it was completely turned in another direction, as if, it's a bit like, what they're accusing, like Elon Musk, of unleashing all the sordid types of individuals on the planet. I mean, just because you allow free speech, it doesn't mean that free speech means criminal attitude, people coming on and promoting
That's right.
criminal activities. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
That's right.
But this is the sort of bullshit, the way they double talk and turn the narrative and message around.
CBC had an article about that, about the acquisition, saying that Elon Musk's free speech absolutism is dangerous for human rights because
Absolutism.
well, he has described himself as a free speech absolutist, but this entire article was saying basically that, like, that it's going to be human rights abuse because they're going to put certain vulnerable demographics. I'm sure you can guess exactly which kinds of demographics they meant.
Exactly.
It's
all the woke,
of online harassment or whatever.
It's all the woke.
Musk has explicitly stated when he says free speech, he means what is allowable under law.
Exactly.
He had a small Twitter
Precisely.
where he explicitly articulated that when he says free speech, he means what's allowable by law, and anything beyond that is outside of the scope of what Twitter should be doing, and is actually going against the will of the people, because if they want less free speech, they will vote for less free speech, and that's how that should be decided.
Yeah.
Which I think is a very reasonable take. I'm not at all trying to exonerate Elon Musk from any scrutiny here.
No.
But the fact that CBC will pretend like we don't know what it's going to do with all this free speech, and he's come out and he's been like, "Hey, I mean this and this and this," like very clearly, very calmly.
Exactly. Well, the reason why is quite simply, for them, Twitter is. This is why I actually noticed recently, even with my YouTube, I've actually noticed my YouTube subscribers going up in the last couple of weeks much more rapidly. I've been growing, and even Bart's been growing much more rapidly. I think they've just taken the pedal off the actual censorship
for now.
For now, that's true, and because they are fearful that people like Elon and maybe other companies as well may shift and say, "Oh, look, Elon may get an advantage. We don't want him getting an advantage. We're going to shift." And that's why they've taken the pedal off slightly.
If you're noticing that on YouTube, that's very telling, because YouTube is unaffiliated with Twitter, and that it would indicate to me that they're hedging their bets against a possible inquiry, because there has been a distinct phenomenon on Twitter, very, very provably, after the acquisition of all of these right-leaning accounts, seeing orders of magnitude more followers immediately on a 24-hour basis, like literally 10 times, 20 times more followers all of a sudden, and then left-leaning outlets experiencing a similar decrease out of nowhere. So it can't possibly be bot accounts or dummy accounts. It's not real people unsubscribing. It's absolutely a suppression algorithm of some kind that's been distorting the perception of the popularity of these opinions for online discourse, and I think that is going to come out. I wouldn't be surprised at all if there is some sort of inquiry about that, because Jack Dorsey got in front of Congress and lied. And if Twitter is found out about that, then it wouldn't be a very far stretch for them to assume that it's worth investigating other platforms as well. So,
look how Twitter have basically changed things overnight.
Right.
They're running scared.
Yeah, that's what they're definitely in panic mode, burning documents and shredding things as fast as they can before they hand over the keys.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, some of these people don't realize that Elon can actually take action for them destroying the property of that business, because those documents are the property of the business. They're not theirs personal. They're employees of the business. They are not owners of the business. He's the owner. Those documents belong to the business. If he finds out that they've basically destroyed documents or removed documents, he can sue them for damages to his business, because what they're doing is they're taking away documents that could help him identify problems in his business and improve his business, and that could affect him financially down the track.
I wouldn't be surprised at all if he conducts a full audit of all of Twitter's policies that way and finds some obvious holes.
Exactly. That would be the smart thing to do if I was him, and basically then take legal action against these people. I would chase them. They gave him a hard time. It's about time they put the boot on the other, and he's got good because there's corporate law that covers a lot of this sort of stuff. You just can't go into your business. Even as an employee, you can't just shred whole things of your business.
Mhm.
You basically can be prosecuted. It's criminal behavior.
Oh yeah, no, but
Yeah.
it shows the level of hubris that Twitter was operating from.
Exactly.
That they kept obvious records of these things so that they would know how their various approaches had worked, and they did
Exactly.
so knowing it was wrong, and they did so under the belief that it would never be found out because the company would never go private. And so they would always have this colluding board of executives to be able to agree
Precisely.
to toe
Yeah.
the line for each other, and that's the rug's been pulled out from under them on that, which is really interesting to watch.
Exactly. I don't think that these people realize the thin ice they're on.
Mhm.
By
Well,
doing
I think
this,
they are
by
quickly realizing that
yeah,
now, but they
by
didn't
doing
before.
by doing, but also beyond the, it's look, even if you've done certain things at the time, even if the new owner takes over, looks at the documents and reveals this sort of stuff, because it belongs to him. It's his commercial property to do as he likes with. At most, they may be exposed for their wokeness.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? But destroying documents of a company, that's a criminal offense. So what these people are doing to cover their tracks so they don't have, you could say, are not exposed in the social media side, they don't realize, but they're going to realize very soon that is criminal, a criminal act. You
Well,
can't go into a
it could
business
be that
and trash documents or equipment of that without basically being prosecuted criminally for destroying the property of that company.
well, I don't think it's unreasonable to suppose that they're taking what they perceive as the lesser risk of risking that prosecution for destroying documents versus what might be revealed in those documents.
Who knows? Who knows?
That's speculation on my part,
yeah,
but I
yeah,
think
it could be. It could be.
it's a
We don't know. It
they
could be
have to
quite
know
bad.
that this is that they have to know that they're putting themselves at risk
They
of
are. They are.
in liability for destroying documents. So it makes
For
you wonder,
taking
what are they trying
that
to
sort of
avoid
risk.
by doing that?
What are they hiding?
Right.
To take this sort of risk, what are they hiding?
Hmm.
Because
It's massive, whatever it is.
yeah. Because if somebody's basically got, okay, I do damage to this business, whatever the damage is, I mean, it's like going into, I work for a certain employer, take the sledgehammer, going in and busting all their computers. That's a criminal offense. You
Mhm.
can't do that. Or wiping all their databases, you can't do that. That's their core business. You destroyed billions of dollars of business. That's a criminal offense. No different than thieving off them or taking that away or whatever. So if they do something like that, for them to know that is a criminal offense and do it
Yep.
still,
Yep.
what are they hiding?
Yep.
What are they bloody hiding? It must be horrendous.
Could be.
Yes, we are speculating here. Just my dear friends, my close and dear, loving friends from YouTube.
If I were to speculate further about it,
I love yous. I got to do that just to cover myself. This is what you forced me to do, Jared. You come on here.
I think
you put all this sort of stuff out there, and I've literally have to then kiss YouTube ass in order to basically so they don't go crazy on me. Anyway, continue, rebel.
I think it's reasonable to suggest that they're likely covering evidence of just to what degree they have been manipulating public discourse, by which I mean grooming opinions by manipulating data to produce artificially inflated numbers for popularity for certain opinions and completely shadow banning or downranking others. So to reinforce people who have certain views into thinking that their views are correct because they're very popular, and vice versa. And that might sound small, but
I think there could
the
be other things as well.
the damage.
Favors for some political mates.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Is that
Ooh.
extends into the political realm, and given that there's
Class.
a very specific hot button issue around the most recent American election that you're not allowed to talk about on YouTube because YouTube is a platform of open inquiry.
That's it. That's it.
I think that it's fair to assume that it's probably related to that.
Well, I would say I'd bet my bottom dollar that it's related to that. And you can actually see already within the political class there are moves. Let's assess social media. It must need some rules and all that.
Yes,
All
it
of a
needs
sudden,
regulating.
all of a sudden, we've got the new czars, of disinformation czars
That's right.
being appointed to basically deal with these
Yes.
unscrupulous operators.
Isn't that fascinating? So, just about, I think it was about 3 months ago, the Liberal government in Canada tabled two pieces of legislation. I forget the bill numbers, Bill C-11, and I think it might have been C-10 beneath it. Anyway, they're basically just internet regulation bills. The right would call them internet censorship bills, which I think is more accurate. The guise is regulation. So what they're saying is we need to be able to promote Canadian content. So the CRTC, the Canadian Radio and Television Corporation, or no, Commission, has like the regulatory body for where the media Canadians consume, has always had Canadian content provisions. So like on the radio, for example, if you're going to be a broadcaster, in Canada, you have to have a certain percentage, certain amount of your airtime as Canadian content, which is ostensibly to encourage Canadian content creators. Which seems reasonable. But the thing is that this most recent bill is applying that to the internet. So it's saying that if YouTube's going to be in Canada, you have to artificially promote X number of Canadian content producers. In addition to this, though, the government is saying, oh, and we'll decide what content from Canada is allowed to be promoted and what isn't. So that's
quite clear censorship.
Yes, underneath of the guise of suppressing misinformation and disinformation because it's so harmful.
Okay, so you guys have already started on that.
Yeah, and so here we are 3 months later, and Biden is enacting effectively the exact same thing. It's through different policy angles, but isn't it curious that both Canada and America, within such a short time frame, would endeavor to control the exact same thing the same way?
Well, Australia's going down the same pathway. It seems like the countries which are part of the Five Eyes, they share intelligence and all that, which is New Zealand.
Yes, Canada
Australia,
doesn't spy on its own citizens because why would they need to when New Zealand can do it for them?
Or Australia can do it for them as well.
Or whoever, exactly. Yeah,
exactly. They spy on other people's citizens within the Five Eyes. That's how it's done. And in that way, they share information, but they're not actually spying on their own citizens. They're not breaking their own law, but they're getting the information anyway. It's a joke. It's a grey area, but they're using this grey area. And that's why they create these, what I call ambiguous little holes in some of their legislation. You read it and you go, why are they putting that in there? Because they actually, when they talk about this, they also have, like sharing of information, stuff like that for, anti-terrorists and all this sort of stuff or whatever they put in there. And you go, and then you've got this other parts of the legislation. You go, well, what's that all about? And then when you realize what's been happening, because there's been a few people that have revealed some stuff around the place, and that really what they've been doing is each government has been spying for the other government on the other governments, on the other people's citizens, so they don't have to do it themselves directly and don't violate their laws directly. It's what a joke.
And it's all done with the correct rhetoric and the correct optics for plausible deniability. And the plausible deniability will be created for them by their corporate media mouthpieces that claim to just tell people the straight facts in the news. Meanwhile, they always seem to find a reason to push the same narratives that the government wants pushed. For example, recently in the wake of this internet censorship endeavor from the Canadian government, CBC is now, you can see these same threads, these stories being published that, regulating the internet would fix this. So just most recently, I covered this on my channel talking about 25% of Canadians believe online conspiracies, and this is dangerous. So we need to suppress the conspiracies.
Oh, we've had some similar stories in Australia as well by the, what they call the fact checkers, which is the official government sort of news sort of channel funded by the government, very woke and they've got their own fact checkers. And when you actually look behind what they're doing is It's a joke. It's very selective the way they look at things, and you realized they're just making things up. How are they analyzing this sort of stuff? Because there's no proof, and even when you go to their site, they'll just tell you they've got like a band. Oh, it's so much. These may be right, or these may be close, or these are MB, or this is quite seems to be quite false. But they don't really provide you with sufficient data where they actually captured what sort of to be able to go and analyze it yourself. It's just basically you have to take their opinion on the way they've analyzed
That's
it, and they've come to their conclusions. So you go, well, you're not much of a fact checker if you don't provide the raw data so people can actually assess whether you are or not, bona fide. And that's
CBC is bad for that in Canada too. I'm especially critical of CBC because they're funded entirely by the government, but I could be equally critical of other mainstream media in Canada because they also got $600 million in salary subsidies recently. But yeah, they're bad for they don't post their sources very often. They'll once in a while they'll link to a paper or they'll link to a person's name who's making a claim, but it's really hard to find study for example.
Exactly.
For example, this recent story I covered talking about the conspiracy theories in Canada, right? It was based on online polling data from like a year ago. And it was 4,500 people responded to a survey of 33 questions. They don't link you the survey. They don't make that. They don't make that easy to find. They don't actually. They don't communicate any of the specific beliefs of what these conspiracies supposedly are. It's just whatever you want a conspiracy to be, whatever you think should be disregarded as conspiracy. That's what it is in the story. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's like, remember the recent FIO? I did a video on it. The UK data on how many people actually died from, not with, from COVID. Remember 2020, 21, and it was 17,403, and that was for the 3 quarters of 21. And then what did they do? They inserted right at the top a link and saying that, which is basically go to this link and we will explain why these figures are what they are. That means they'll bullshit and say, oh, look, it's really this, but these people had other conditions, but they also died from that. So they try to magnify the data and say, well, this is just specific for this, people that died, but people did die from both the disease, which had other conditions. No, they actually died from those conditions, not from the actual disease, because they weren't in an ICU. Well, these people are only the ones that got into an ICU and died in the ICU from the actual disease. Stop lying. But that's what they do. They do it like that. Let's reinterpret the data type thing. They put it at that because they have to, by law, they have to put that freedom of information. But then they put their own commentary there. Well, why are you putting the commentary? Provide us the raw data. We'll make up our own minds. We don't need the commentary or the bullshit commentary of manipulation and telling us. It's like the fabrication, the way they take the raw data, they ignore it completely, and then they basically adjust it to their liking and then reinterpret it in their own. In many cases, it's inverse of what really the data shows.
Without providing the raw data. Yeah. In New Brunswick, where I live, they were initially reporting all of the COVID hospitalizations together, and the government came under fire.
Quickly. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it, and see you after, because he's in the UK with the 15 pounds, and obviously I'll probably see him on the Eurasian one. See you there. Go and get some sleep, mate.
So New Brunswick was originally reporting all of those numbers together, and they came under fire. So they released a new quote-unquote COVID dashboard where they did give a breakdown between hospitalized with versus hospitalized from. So it was people who were hospitalized for COVID versus people who were hospitalized for something else and then tested positive, right? They gave that distinction, and which was great, so that you can interpret the data a lot more accurately that way, of course. They've recently dropped the second half off of that entirely, so they only report on the numbers of people who are hospitalized for COVID symptoms. They don't even talk about people who were admitted for other things and then tested positive. This has actually come under fire, again, because the public has become so enamored with analyzing these figures for themselves that it's unacceptable to them to not have the more inflated artificial number, basically. So the two private hospital networks that run the healthcare in New Brunswick have decided to create their own COVID dashboard where they will provide the number of people who were hospitalized for something else, but then tested positive. And that's very satisfying to the public because the government has painted themselves into a corner over this stuff,
It's
right?
crazy.
By first they manipulate the data and then it convinces everyone that it's this big panic. So then the government says, oh shit, we can't get out of this unless we actually start telling the truth and show that this is not as severe as we said it was. And so they start doing that. And the public says, no. You told us this was really, really bad. It must be really bad. You're hiding the data now. That's the level of discourse that I see around this in New Brunswick.
Look, I can understand why some people react like that, because when you've been lied so many times, you wonder whether with these people, they're so unreliable and they've shown themselves to be liars in the way they conduct themselves. People lose confidence in anything they show.
That's right.
The only way you can deal with this problem is to basically create an independent legal authority of judges and say, here you go. As a legal authority, you take a look at the data and give a pronouncement, of that sort of stuff. Because that's the only way you can actually deal with that, to bring confidence back to the system. These politicians need to realize they need to distance themselves and say, look, a lot of people have lost confidence in the way we've been running things and stuff like that. We will give it to an independent legal authority to basically assess the data, the raw data, and then come up with certain conclusions and present that sort of stuff. In that way, you may restore some confidence, and people then may, will be able to see that raw data, the actual numbers of people dying in ICUs, and they'll be able to say this amount died with C19 in an ICU, period. Like that British Freedom of Information provided the exact numbers, 17,403 over 1 year and 3 quarters. Nearly, I can't remember, because it was just at the beginning of the 4th quarter so even, let's say you had a few hundred there, it's still not going to get to 18,000. It's still going to be sub that in many regards. Where the 89-90 flu pandemic, 32 years earlier, with a younger population, a smaller population as well. So a smaller population, so the percentage is larger against the population, was over 19,000. And some of the records, those were the records that were available, public records. There were a lot of records that were basically destroyed in that period. And so even Wikipedia sort of speculates that we've got records for about 19,000 we can convert, but it could be up to 29,000. But we don't have those additional records because it's 32 years ago. And a lot of these smaller, especially, like local authorities, don't keep a lot of those records to that length as like the federal sort of, So even the records that were kept are much higher than the COVID numbers, with a population which is older, larger, and with comorbidities, and still the numbers are less. So where's the great risk to humanity that these people have been pronouncing based on that? It just doesn't make sense. And this is why when Denmark looked at their numbers and looked at their side effects of, some of their interventions, they realized
they stopped.
Yeah, they stopped. They stopped because they seriously looked at the stuff. They looked at the data. They looked at their old data. And then they also looked at, it was the first government in the world that actually looked at their own government statistics and data on which they hold as an entity, looked at the side effects and issues and the pronouncements. And I said, we can't basically be jabbing people every month to basically, that's not efficacious. It'll bankrupt the system. It's just not workable. It's illogical. And then you've got all these potential side effects from long-term exposure to this constant, jabbing. Plus, it's not really changing the numbers in comparison to other things and all that. So let's just pull away from this whole mess. And that's what they did, which was good. But unfortunately, a lot of other governments around the world have been doubling down. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, and you get mainstream, you get corporate media towing the line for them. CBC recently ran an article I saw here saying that, here's why you may still experience a breakthrough infection despite being fully protected ostensibly from the jabs, right? So it's they cover for the gaps that exist and try to offer try to offer an explanation that people find acceptable,
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
a lullaby to keep them snoozing, as I would put it.
It's mad what's been happening out there. It's just really, really crazy. Currently in that situation, and it's like iNature here that's asking about socially inept children and speech impediments and stuff like that. To a large extent, kids are being socialized very poorly in our society. This woke agenda and all that is really actually affecting the development and also the mental development, let alone the nutritional side, which is very poor. It plays an important role. I mean, Mary Rudder could see in a lot of the young people in the tribal areas, like amongst the Maasai, the Huds, and all that, always smiling, always happy, always sociable.
That matters.
Yeah, nutrition matters in these sort of cases, and obviously there can be some genetics, and that hope happens. Like, remember Pottinger's cat? If you've got poor nutrition over 3 or 4 generations, you can get these problems occurring in children. And the only way you can minimize them is by increasing the animal foods and some of the supplements and stuff like that. Like in particular, some of the amino acids like taurine, like choline, like phosphatidylserine, carnosine and stuff like that. You may have to give them above, especially if they're not eating enough animal foods. You may have to supplement these things because they're so critical for brain development and for growth.
Socializing them really matters too. Socializing them with other children, socializing them with people, with older peers as well. Probably minus masks if possible too.
Exactly.
The WHO just adjusted their developmental milestones for children, I believe, to try to cover this problem, which is the only tool they have in their toolbox, which is we'll just redefine what the terms mean, and then it's not an issue anymore. What do you mean it's not a vaccine? Yes, it is.
It's a joke.
Look at the definition.
Yes, I mean, why would a vaccine need to provide immunity? What are you talking about? That's not necessary for a vaccine.
Right, or herd immunity is only brought about by sufficient numbers of the population receiving these jabs. It doesn't happen from an illness going through the population and then having natural immunity. No. It was never defined that way.
Well, this is the sort of madness, and the problem is a lot of the kids have had their education interrupted. They've had, and that can affect speech development as well. Socializing with other kids and playing with other kids. Actually, play is part of, modern educationists that understand that very young kids in particular, play time is really important in developing those social skills and interactions, confidence, and the ability to basically master, because they will actually have to sort of navigate themselves with other kids, so they have to talk to them, explain things and point things out or whatever, because kids are quite brutal with each other, so they have to have this sort of word talk or screaming sometimes. But anyway, there's always this interaction. But what happens is they learn to navigate, they learn to interact, they learn to basically use language in these sort of social situations. So yeah, that can be an issue as well. But so it's the socializing, getting kids to play outdoors, not being indoors on screens.
And some kids just develop at different rates too, of course. I had a speech impediment as a kid until nobody could understand me talk until I remember being in speech therapy and at like 4 or 5 years old, maybe, being taught how to make certain sounds for words, of things. I remember being taught how to make sure my tongue touched the roof of my mouth for certain consonant sounds and these sorts of things.
Yep. That also can be because of the narrowing of the face. That means it actually hasn't properly formed. There's so many things about iNature, about these sort of things that could be, because your question is a very open, you can fill that bucket of yours, that question, with a lot of things in that regard. So it's not an easy one things. But one thing that from a traditional father that I learned was very early. I mean, Dad used to basically read us, and even Mum used to read us books and stuff like that. My father used to actually read us the newspaper, so the Greek newspaper at the time, because that's what he bought. We were young, and he would just take out the Greek newspaper and he'd read it to us and read us stuff and get us to read passages out of the Greek newspaper. So it's that interaction. And my dad's a traditional man, comes back from the 1960s. I was born in the 60s. So
reading
we're not
aloud for
talk-
children and enunciating every
Exactly.
single word is definitely
Exactly.
very important for speech impediments.
Precisely, it's really important, you know. And I had a bit of, and I still have a bit of, you know, where I struggle with, you know, long words. I can basically have a bit of weakness there, and I've had it for most of my life. It's just one of those things.
You don't read chemical names or anything like that very often, do you?
What's that?
I'm just joking. I would say that seems like it would be very relevant for a lot of the content that you make.
Yeah, yes. I do. Even though I understand what they are, I can explain them and all that. It's a bit of a tongue twister, you know, for me. But it's just something that I've improved over time from when I was a youngster. But it was something that I struggled a bit with, and that's with a father that did my sister way better, and my younger sister way better, because they got actually more time with my dad, both my sisters, reading the newspaper and all that, where I didn't get a lot of that. And mum was, you know, she wasn't really into reading a lot and stuff like that. She did a bit when she was younger, but then she sort of, you know, got into other things in life. So I didn't get the same exposure, and their language skills are way better than mine. You know, my younger sister, she's 25 years away in Greece, comes back and is sort of, you know, she could just speak even, you know, plain, even boganish English, and nobody would know, you know, that she was basically had been away for 25 years in a different country, just snap back like that. It was just ridiculous. Even my brother Sean goes, I can't believe your sister's away for 25 years, comes back, and she can actually speak, you know, like a regular street talk English, you know, what we call boganish, or, you know, street talk type English, even better than some of the bogans, you know, if she wants to. You know, I mean, she goes, that's bloody ridiculous. You know, how does she do that? And I put it down to my father putting both of my sisters on their lap, you know, on his lap, and basically reading the newspaper to them, where I was just basically away wanting to play with my toys and all that. I didn't want to be around my dad. You know, I wanted to do other things, my toys, and go to my friend's place and stuff like that. So, you know, girls tend to be close to their dad and I was close to my mum when they're young. It's just the way they are, you know, things until you become a young adult, and then you basically, it shifts. It goes the other way. But they, in those early years, they actually got that interaction, and their language skills are way better than mine. You know, and my sister, like, even though she's lived in Greece 25 years, my older sister, she's got like precision language, so she will comment, which really annoys me when I make certain mistakes in English grammar or whatever, and she'll just point those out to me, and I go, "Can you stop doing this, correcting me?" You know, it's just really annoying. And she's also a teacher as well.
Yeah, so to go
Annoying.
back to the question briefly, I would say, in a nutshell, the solution is to model the correct behavior and expose them to the correct behavior as much as possible.
Exactly. Yes.
In terms of what causes it, there's such a myriad of that's a really, really, really multifaceted issue of what actually causes it. But it would be reasonable to me to infer that whatever the solution is, then the problem is caused by the absence of that solution. So it's probably that they're not seeing it enough. They're not being exposed to the correct behaviors enough. Yeah. Nutrition would definitely play a role too. Having a nutrient-dense diet would absolutely help. We know that, for example, having good gut health and lots of, for example, raw milk specifically can help to curb spectrum-like behaviors in children with antisocial or aversive behaviors for autism.
Yep. I mean, I've seen it where I've actually got people to put their young child that had a lot of like anxiety, a lot of you know, hyperactivity and stuff like that, put them with a bit of taurine and actually calm them down. Now they're actually, you know, like really good students. I'm not kidding you. You know,
I believe
I totally believe it.
It is yeah. And so, well, even a lot of adults have found it, let alone young people.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I noticed it.
I would prefer people didn't need to supplement and actually ate more animal foods. But sometimes
I would definitely get raw milk in that child's diet if at all possible.
That as well.
They have such a demand for every nutrient that's in raw milk while they're developing.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that, but the reality is that in our society there's still a lot of resistance to animal foods.
Well, where's the RCT? Where's the meta analysis of the RCTs to show this?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh God.
Oops.
Get over your traumas, Jared.
No, Luke.
Luke's
don't
got some.
Misunderstand.
Luke, you've got some audio problems over there.
Yeah, you're sounding a little bit robotic. You're reporting to us from a helicopter.
You're close to, like last time, you're close to your basically mic to your computer. I think, remember like last time? So it was actually playing up. It was doing a feedback. And things like that. I think nutrition and socialization are very important, those combinations. And also, I think on the moral side, as a parent, you need to basically be a parent. You can't be their friend. Once they become adults, become their friend. You need to be their parent. They need to know the limitations, the restrictions, and you also need to basically, they need to follow the rules, and because that's really important in their socializing. Those traditional values and those traditional approaches in bringing up children play a big role, and also getting kids to work, doing tasks, even around the house and eventually even outside the home. I mean, my father actually had me working within his own business, but also, we had to also do domestic tasks within the home. And then at 13 and a half, I had my first job outside the home as a waiter. And I did that job and a number of others, and I was quite good. I used to get very good tips. And then I know my brother, Sean, his daughter and his son both worked out as youngsters in their 15s, as teenagers and all that, and got pocket money and all that. But also they learned the responsibility of work. Now they hold good positions, responsible positions in life, and are getting well paid for it as well. And the reason for that is because they are responsible. They've got an attitude, a work ethic, stuff like that. These are a child. Remember tribal societies? Once you get about 13, you become a young adult, as they consider. You go out and do, those sort of tasks that the rest of the tribe does. You're not expected to go and jump on a mammoth or something, but you go and assist and learn the craft of hunting, the craft of becoming an adult. So less pandering to this modern day bullshit, and more trying to incentivize and build responsibility and strength and resilience for kids to take responsibility and to try and build the sort of character you want to see in them to become good adults, ultimately, because that's really your responsibility. It's the parents' responsibility to do that, and to provide the good nutrition, and to provide the support in terms of providing, not over supervising kids. My father never over supervised me, and your father probably didn't over supervise you. Far too much supervision. Parents get far too much involved. Let the kids be kids, play out there amongst themselves, squabble and fight and all that. And if you have to separate them occasionally, that's okay. But you know what? They're going to learn a lot of social skills and how to manage their stress levels and how to manage their relationships, because the world isn't perfect and it's not basically fair, and they have to acquire. So there's a lot of things there to unpack and unravel. It's just the way it is.
Well, Harry, it's past midnight here, so I think I should probably. I'm enjoying the conversation, but
get to bed. You need your sleep. You've had your milk, young boy.
Yes, I have.
You've had your milk, basically. Now tuck yourself into bed. Let's just kiss you on the forehead. There you go. Now get to bed.
Yes. Don't mess up your circadian rhythm any more than you have to.
That's it. Otherwise, Uncle Harry will get very cross with you.
Thank you, Harry. That's the type of parenting that a youngin' like me needs.
That's it. That's exactly it. Now go to bed. Thanks, mate, for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
And thanks for the info about what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Oh yeah, no, that's just off the top of my head. I have been. I try to check CBC News to find articles that I find sufficiently objectionable for me to get annoyed enough to want to make a video about it. I did that yesterday. There's a new video on my channel about that conspiracy story. But
and just can you just remind people about your channel as well, because you do a lot of content. Yep. JB Morrison, it's in the actual featured. So if you go to my homepage, right at the bottom, there are the featured channels. You'll find, Jared's channel.
Yep,
Please go and subscribe there.
youtube.com/c/JB Morrison. I got the vanity URL to work.
That's it.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Easy.
Anyway, have a good night, you two.
See you, mate. Take care.
Stay well, Jack.
See ya.
Oh, back to us.
I hope that my audio issues has resolved themselves. I have no idea what's going on.
You're still getting a crackling audio coming through. See what you can do. You'll come back. Oh, he's actually just given me some stuff to post. I'll actually post this. This is a nice one. Paul Saladino, fruits are part of an animal-based diet. Bullshit. Carbs are needed for hormone health. Harry, you want to be shot? Go ahead, salad boy, make my day. Dirty Harry. And this one. Oh, let's just magnify this a bit. When Harry starts to rumble about ancient metabolic pathways, oops, the never-ending story.
Oh, yes.
Oh, there you go. What was the a trill, or was it? Yeah, one of them. I can't even remember now. So long ago. I was much younger. Yes, the flying. What was it? It was a half dog, half dragon dog, or something like that.
Oh,
Can't remember now. In the never-ending story. Anyway, gotta eat a dozen eggs now. Yeah, enjoy. Hello. I'm currently taking 1 teaspoon twice per day of taurine. Reacting okay. Good. Yep. Yep. It really helps me. That's good. Yeah. So play around with it, and play around with it with your exercise. Play around with it with your sleep, and see the sort of results you get. And it really depends. Sometimes people, they'll take a gram and they'll be fine. They'll get good sleep. And sometimes they've got a lot of stress, for whatever reason, in life. We don't live in tribal societies with low stress levels and just people sitting around going for a hunt, coming back, sitting and just joking about how the hunt went and certain incidents of the hunt. We live much more stressful lives, and we actually also place more importance to things that I don't think are as important. Once you get to my age, 56, you'll realize that. But when you're a bit younger, you sort of, so. But at the end, play around with that sort of stuff and see, like if you're very stressed when you're having difficulty sleeping, up it a bit in the evening, just to basically improve that sleep part. So, and it's not going to affect you in a negative way. It'll just basically sort of bring down cortisol to normalize it to the level that it should be, and allow melatonin to magnify. So it's an important thing. Calming effect through the day. Sometimes people find it anxious, the work environment or whatever, and by taking a bit through the day, they can actually improve their ability to operate with amongst other people and improve. And especially when you're in the early stages of a carnivore diet and you're still adapting and stuff like that, it can help. So there's a lot of things that can help with the electrolyte balancing as well. So it's got its benefits in that regard. I'm gonna have a guess that it's Volvida, the actual name. I may have if I've mispronounced it, Volvida. If I've mispronounced it, I do apologise. But I have difficulty with long words or words that I'm unfamiliar with pronouncing them. It's just the way I am. MS is great. Crazy how formerly thinned areas of my crown have thickened up. Why poison yourself with phenystidine, MSM, 6 grams and 10 grams of taurine had been great. Yep. And that's the thing. I mean, I've noticed the thing, my alopecia and all that went away. Once I got more protein in and I supplemented with a bit of MSM and taurine. It depends. Some people need a bit more. Some people need a bit less. You know, I think for me, I didn't need as much. 2 grams or 1 gram was more than enough of MSM. If I went too high, I ended up, my nails to end up growing like mad continuously. I couldn't stop them growing, which became a nuisance. And my hair became so thick that it, I'd have to go more often to the barbers, and they just cost money. It's not good. There's a thin line between vanity and cost.
Absolutely.
So yes. Oh yes, please hit the like button if you haven't, or jump on it, or bounce on it, or whatever you want to do it. Caress it, kiss it. I'll leave that all up to you. Hello, Elizabeth. Good to see you. So, hi, Harry. Now, Kate Coach is ex-carnivore. Okay. She says that now that we shouldn't eat naked carbs. She says that if you want to eat carbs, you must be with fat, so you don't spike insulin, or eating it naked. I'm not sure what she means by naked carbs. Got no idea what she means by that. Do you know? Have you heard?
No, that's, by the way, how's my audio, first of all?
Okay.
Is it better? Is it better now?
Your audio is better now. Yeah.
Okay. But that basically means having the carbs by themselves. So you have a carb-rich food by itself,
Okay. So that would not engage the Randall cycle potentially. But then again, it depends on if you've basically had, let's say, like a high-fat meal with protein at a certain time, and that's still digesting in your system, and then you throw a whole lot of carbs, let's say an hour or 2 hours later. Well, it may sound like naked carbs, but it may end up engaging the Randall cycle.
Yep.
Depends if you've basically done a lot of exercise at the same time. You may have depleted glycogen to some extent, so it may not be as problematic. Yep. So it really depends on a lot of things, and I haven't been following her in recent times, so I don't know what she's up to and what she's been saying. I did notice that Bart had commented that she's sort of lost her way. He had looked at something recently of hers. The reality is, look, there are multiple populations around the world that are basically highly carnivorous, like the Inuit, like the Maasai, and they don't have a problem with eating a lot of protein at all. They don't have any of these issues. Look, modern humans do find it difficult. We've adapted and we've consumed now carbohydrates in very small amounts, very small amounts in the end of in the early parts of the interglacial period. This is about a bit over 20,000, where we just basically sporadically, as the animals became like leaner, we tended to basically go for some of these carbohydrates periodically here or there, a small amount, and that increased over time, and that sort of drove us from a animal-based diet into a diet based on a mixed diet of agricultural, domesticated animals and domesticated plants is what we shifted. It's only been in, but even then, there were periods that some populations had more plants than animals. It depended on the population in that part of the world, and so it varied in that regard. So some populations would have this increase, and some population would have a decrease. And you can actually see it. Those populations that had more carbs would have more issues, like for instance, that had very little, much lower, like in the modern world where 2/3 carbohydrates, 1/3 animal foods, like the Egyptians, and it was primarily fish and fowl and stuff like that. And occasionally, when an animal became very old, they may have slaughtered it, but it was primarily used for, for basically ploughing and stuff like that. And these people would be considered, like, by the vegetarian community as the perfect diet by the nutritionists as well. And they were the only one of the few populations that were consuming that level of carbohydrate, 2/3, like today's people. And they were the ones, and this was before fructose, like before having like refined sugar, and basically, in refined sugar, like we have in today's world, these were pretty much having seasonal fructose, which meant honey or fruit seasonally only, not all year round, only for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months in a year. That was it. 9 months of the year, they were just eating glucose, a heavy glucose diet, starch, grains, coming from grains, and some tubers were primarily grains, which was wheat-based. And these were populations that had cardiovascular disease and described it. And if you take a look at their tombs, the non-idealized statues of their goddesses or whatever, but their non-idealized were themselves, with men having, a lot of estrogen, man boobs, and all this sort of stuff. They've actually got statues. It's in, of these people, the way they depicted themselves, the way they actually looked. Then they had idealized forms of their gods or goddesses, but their actual look. And they had health problems, these people. So it's quite clear that, yes, you can reproduce to some extent if you get a third of the modern people, but you can get very sick. And that's what we were watching. I mean, when Alexander turned up, the Egyptians didn't even put up a fight. They just basically surrendered and said, "Yep, you can become our ruler," just like that. No resistance whatsoever. So that tells you a lot about, what their diet did to their population in basically weakening them to quite a substantial level at that time in history. But if you take a look at other populations that had more animal or like pastoralists or stuff like that, and only had a small amount of plants in their diet, they were much robust, strong, lived longer. If we take a look at the pastoralists, who are all the pastoralists? You go down to Ikaria in Greece, the people in the mountains, they are pastoralists. They live the longest. You go to Sardinia, the ones in the mountains, they live, we know Grundy told us, I did the video on it recently. The people, I knew that anyway, but I used his words because he's sort of a low carb plant based. So I used his words against that community that promotes that sort of bullshit about blue zones. And then you've basically got, the people in Loma Linda, well, they were doing about 50% dairy. I mean, that's pastoralists. That's equivalent to what pastoralists do. They do about 50%, 40 to 50% of theirs is dairy. Now, when you add eggs and fish and other things, it ends up being 2/3 animal-based, 1/3 plant-based. That's what those 1950s and 1960s research on the longevity people in that region were all about. The rest is just made up bullshit. Down in Costa Rica, well, on that coastal peninsula, they're all pastoralists. They have cattle. You can go actually and see videos of basically them herding, there's this 93-year-old herding basically, cattle around. And it's only recently that we've seen, all the influx of stores down. They can get tortillas and stuff like that, like the rest of the country, But that's not what they were eating in the past. There were no shops there. They were just eating their own stuff on that land. And it's quite an arid land. It's a quite arid land with not a lot of vegetation. And so you basically, because you can see the dirt is quite dry. It's arid. You've got small amounts of vegetation. You don't really grow a lot of, tubers or vegetables or fruit or stuff like that on there. There's only one, there's very soury type fruit tree, and that's about it. And that you'd get a bit seasonally, and that's about it. The old man showed in one of his videos. But everybody concentrates on tortillas and all that. And all these big beasts that are going around that they're actually slaughtering and eating, everybody ignores that. It's a joke. It's like they go to Ikaria and they look at the coastal areas, the touristy areas where they're eating all the carbohydrates that are being shipped in by the ship. But nobody goes inland to see all these pastoralists in the mountains basically eating all this dairy and meat and stuff like that, and some green vegetables, seasonally around the spring period and stuff like that. And, complete disconnect. The majority of people, even in the agricultural area, when you actually look, the healthier ones, they're eating more animal-based, less plant-based. When they shift to more plant-based, we get sicker. We just have to see to the modern era. Go back to the 1950s and 60s, before refrigeration, nobody knew about salads. Nobody grew salads back in the 1950s or 60s. Are you kidding me? They just had tubers and basically fruit seasonally. That was it. But the majority of their food was actually coming from animal-based, dairy, eggs, and meat. It was 2/3 animal-based back then. That was really what the food supply was. Even in America. That's why people were healthier and slimmer and living longer, physically active and eating more animal foods, more robust. Nobody had all these modern-day afflictions. Somebody gets to 30 years old and can't even walk properly because they got so many bone issues or whatever. I mean, people back then were in their 70s and all that, and didn't have those conditions when they were primarily animal based. But this is the bullshit that we get constantly. But it's nice to sort of expose that nonsense. And pretty much this is a problem with Kate and a lot of other influencers and online stuff like that. They're ignorant about the past. They've got no connection to the past. And so for them, it's sort of, this is not working. Let's add a bit of this. These people may be under eating protein, which means that they're getting electrolyte disturbances. You add a bit of carbohydrate, you increase. This is the same thing that happened with Salad Boy. You add a bit of insulinogenic inducing food, and immediately your insulin goes up and you retain minerals and don't lose as much. But also you increase your blood pressure, which isn't a good thing. But you do basically retain, and that's why Walter Kempner knew that caused, back in the 1930s, that caused, the low fat sort of diet caused high blood pressure. So basically what he did was he eliminated all electrolytes from the diet because you were retaining so much fluids. You had to basically be able, if you didn't basically lower the actual electrolytes, you couldn't lower the fluid retention. And that would cause problems because that's what a high carbohydrate, high insulin, it retains fluids. But by lowering the electrolytes, you're actually, which is very unhealthy, all this, it's not healthy long-term for your body. But as a short-term solution, it seemed to, disengage the Randall cycle, lower these growth factors and sort of fix things and make people skinnier, like the fruitarians. He basically, like the fruitarians do, he exactly replicated a similar diet, which was 2% fat, 4% protein, and 94% carbohydrate. He gave them raw sugar bags. I'm not kidding you. Raw sugar bags. If you're not eating enough, because he didn't want their muscle wastage, because that's what happens to fruitarians. They don't get enough because they're eating fruit. You can't get enough basically energy from that. As a consequence, you start wasting away your muscles. But if they were basically eating like bags of raw sugar, they wouldn't waste away. They'd slim out, but they wouldn't waste away. Long term, they do mitochondrial damage because of the high deuterium, but that's a different issue. But as a short term thing, you can lose weight doing that, reduce the growth factors, and at the same time, not lose a lot of as much muscle mass. Obviously, a ketogenic diet with enough protein actually does a better job, But obviously he didn't know about that. It was just basically John Hopkins doing it for people with epilepsy. So he was unaware of that literature. It was a different time,
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't even understand the Randall cycle. Philip Randall didn't publish it until 1963. So people were completely ignorant about that information. And I think people like Kate are probably ignorant about that information as well, and don't realize that they're setting themselves up for Randall cycle activation and health problems down the track by
Yes.
doing that.
Yes,
They're
that's the thing.
slipping back to a macro profile, which is similar to a SAD diet, which is inflammatory.
Yep, and that's the thing. There has been this like myopic focus on like continuous blood glucose results, and I'm like, oh, it didn't spike as high. Like if you eat the carbs with proteins and fats, the whole thing. Oh, this have your dessert after your main course and things like that. Oh, it didn't spike. Look, it's not spiking as high. It doesn't matter.
Maybe I can have that sweet right after.
It's like, but what do you think that means? It's safe? Do you honestly think that's not having other ramifications? And just because, oh look, there's no spike, just because of that, you're safe? Is that it?
Yeah, they don't realize that there are many other factors. They are more physically active. It's like the old athletes, which used to do a lot of cardio and stuff like that. They were doing so much cardio. They were burning through a lot of that energy. But the moment they stopped, they start packing on the pounds and the kilos.
It's my dad's story.
Yeah, exactly. Your dad's story, very physically active, then, becomes less physically active as he gets older because you get too much joint pain, too much damage and all that from those foods because they do cause, we know the moment agriculture came into Europe, we see the rise of basically arthritis and osteoarthritis and all that. It just follows. It's not me, it's the archaeologists. The archaeologists look at these agriculturalists and actually see arthritis. You don't see it in tribal people. You see it in agriculturalists. The first agriculturalists, you see arthritis and all that sort of stuff. And, osteoarthritis and issues of that sort. And then your joints are not working properly. And then you can't physically do as much to move and all that. And so you no longer can deplete glycogen. And so then it starts building up in your blood and you have to store it away. And you start engaging the Randall cycle because you're in a higher gradient as a consequence. And you just start packing it on. And that's what happens to a lot of people. That's the sort of the modern day approach. You're young, you've got mitochondrial density, which you haven't destroyed yet. And then you give them this high deuterium food. You dehydrate yourself with a lot of sugar, and then you drink more water, which is just as high in deuterium as basically the actual sugar itself, which basically means you over time destroy more and more of your mitochondria. And at some point, your body goes, well, you've got less mitochondrial density. When you've got less mitochondrial density, you can deal with less energy coming in. When you can deal with less energy coming in, you know what? You're going to start packing it on much faster at a lower gradient, and you're less physically active as well. So it just compounds the problem. And that's why you see these people get to 40s or 50s and explode inside.
Yep.
It's not surprising. This happens constantly. And Kate is setting herself up and her subscribers for the same future, but at a slower pace, but still in the same direction. Yep, I covered that earlier about sort of priming with more fat just before you go into a dry fast. Get yourself into much higher ketosis before you go into a dry fast, and then you're basically producing enough. Because if you go to a dry fast, you need about 3 days to get into ketosis. So if you're not in ketosis and you're not basically producing ketones, you're going to be basically in trouble because you're not breaking down as sufficient fat for water production, internal water production. And you can create dehydration internally. That's why a dry fast, you can actually end up losing even more weight doing a dry fast than a wet fast, because what you're doing is you're forcing the body to produce more water from the fats by releasing more free fatty acids for water production. And then it uncouples mitochondria and radiates that away as heat, the excess, because it can't use it. and you end up basically uncoupling your mitochondria to some extent, without actually having to put polyphenol crap like Grundy
yes.
tells us, use these polyphenols. Forget about all the side effects that it causes. Guys, just use that and uncouple your mitochondria. I'll tell you one thing, there's a lot of things that uncouple, even some like toxins and some things that will kill you, like cyanide, they can uncouple as well. But you know what? They'll kill you. So you don't want too much uncoupling either. So the body, when you give it the right sort of stuff, fat and all that, it will do it to a certain degree. And it also will dump out of your urine a certain amount of ketones if they're not required. So it will actually do a certain level of uncoupling, but not too much. And the excess ketones will just dump them out of your urine. It's a great system, isn't it? So yeah. So when you do a dry fast, I tend to do a dry fast. I always make sure I've pushed up my ketone levels, and then I switch. So I lower my protein, I magnify my my fats and my long chain fats in particular, and I also have dairy fats, like liquid fats. Why? Especially from goats. Goats are medium chain triglycerides that convert, and a lot of short chain fatty acids there that also convert into ketones much easier. So as a consequence, having goat milk or goat sort of dairy or stuff like that, I'm going to shift the ketone sort of direction, and the body will go, okay, we're shifting. And so when I do a dry fast, then the body is able to release free fatty acids very rapidly and produce enough metabolic water for me not to dehydrate. That's the trick. So most people that don't get themselves fat adapted or are not in good ketosis, when they do dry fast, they struggle. Like Bart, because he was drinking a whole lot of ciders and all that. And remember when he had back problems and all that, because he was dehydrating. It was that was what it was caused. And that was because you need 3 days to basically get back into ketosis once you've done cheats. And by then, he was already in pain because he had dehydrated. So that's what happened. So yeah, you got to be very careful with dry fasts, the way you do it. I do not recommend them to people that don't know what they're doing. So I'm not recommending it to you. I do it myself, but I know what I'm doing and how to prepare for it. I've given you how I prepare for it. You may have to get ketone strips or ketone, blood things to know exactly whether you are that, because I know when I'm in ketosis. I know from my own mental state and, physically how I respond. I know that. I don't need to basically jab my, to see exactly where my ketones are and all that. But you may not, because you may not have the experience and so may not know exactly how it's affecting you. So it's really important that you do get something to check if you're going to go down that path, or maybe even chat to Bart, because he's actually done it now. He's more aware of how to do it properly. And so he learned from his own, and not only that, not only did he learn from his own mistake, but we learned. I learned, Lukey learned, and many others from his mistake. And so, if you need somebody to coach you, because I don't do any coaching or stuff like that, here's an option for you in that regard. G'day, Pat. I did notice your comment. You said I'm a handsome man. Thank you for that. Do appreciate it. It's nice for a middle-aged man of my age. I think it's down here, isn't it? Yes, there you go. to get some nice comments from some of my subscribers. I wish more of my subscribers were basically telling me how nice, how cute, and everything else I am. Yes, Raccoon Brigade is coming. Oh, that's all we need. Spencer, how are you, mate? Can't you just get raw milk that has lactobacillus and bifidobacteria in it? It didn't get them adequate amounts from breastfeeding. Oh yeah, you can. It depends on the country. It depends where you are on the planet. That's the biggest problem. In Australia, it's illegal. Raw milk is illegal. I can't get it. I can only get stuff where they kill off the bacteria under pressure. And so I get all the other nutrients, like Kefir and all that, but I just do not get those beneficial bacteria. So what I do is I get them and actually put it in the milk. That's how I do it. So I have to purchase them, which costs me additional money, which is annoying, to put them in something that should have been there in the raw milk in the beginning.
Oh yeah, it's nothing like paying for microorganisms.
Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous, but So, and that's why sometimes I don't bother, and I actually end up making my own kefir with some of these bacterial strains, and then I occasionally have, every 3 months, I'll have a couple of days of kefir, like 3 or 4 days of kefir, just to build up, because we're exposed to so many things in our environment that are basically damaging the type of that. Taurine actually balances out the microbiome, but obviously if you're missing certain strains, it's good to basically maintain them. And there are a whole lot of things that can sometimes, and there may be occasions where I've actually injured myself so badly, I've ended up with the risk of sepsis, and doctor said, you better take antibiotics just in case. And sort of, I didn't want to, but at the other case, sepsis can kill you. So you go, I'm not going to take the risk. It is my life after all. But then you have to go away and start rebuilding again, which is bloody annoying, because bifidobacteria and lactobacillus and all that are far more vulnerable to antibiotics than some of the pathogenics, which is damn bloody annoying, to say the least. So, yeah. I'll put that up again. Well, stroke the. It's like stroking the ego. Stroke the ego. Yes. Yes. Oh, fellas need a bit of a stroking. I better move on before I say something inappropriate.
I could detect something.
Yes. Yes, dirty old mind. And actually, I'm going to rack off shortly, so I'll just cover this. Why does it say that mixing protein plus fat will not spike insulin? Because there's a glucagon to, remember what I say? Insulin to glucagon ratio of 1.3. When there is no carbohydrates, fat does not increase. Remember, you're oxidizing fat. Fat does not increase insulin by a very tiny margin. And when insulin doesn't really rise much, because it's only the mixed macros that magnify it, or carbohydrates that increase it. And carbohydrates on their own also are only a ratio of 4:1 insulin to glucagon. It's only when you combine it with protein that it goes above 4:1. And then when you add fat together with all three macros, then it magnifies. And that's like, junk food. And it can potentially go as high as 70 to 1. We're talking about insulin to glucagon. Glucagon is like non-existent nearly, because there's so much carbs and so much energy coming in that, say, well, we don't need to produce any gluconeogenesis, and we're going to close off hormone sensitive lipase, the fat cells, from releasing anything, because basically there's just tons and tons. We don't even have room enough to oxidize it, let alone we just need to store it. So that's why that magnification happens. And that's what people do every day by eating junk food. They're literally starving themselves. That's why they're so nutrient deficient. Their cells are not functioning and becoming senescent, faster, and they're aging faster, not providing enough nutrition because they're blocking out all these pathways, and they're just in storage mode continuously, like it's basically pre-hibernation, for the animals, and for us, the end of summer and the early part of autumn. We're in that constant state of adding fats, fatting adiposity to ourselves. It's like being at that, because that's what the food environment is. But basically, when you're eating just protein and fat, you're basically in this insulin to glucagon of 1.3. Remember, fasting is 0.8 to 1. So it's not very much. It's a small difference, but enough to allow for muscle protein synthesis, enough for, the signaling of leucine because insulin plays a signaling role. Remember, there's insulin receptors. It's signaling. It's not like something, it's something out there. It's a signaling. Overexpression of this signaling can actually create this sort of inflammation. That's a different thing. That's Randall cycle, which we mean. But it's the over, it's like, it's like blowing a big horn. It's going to cause a bit of damage where just a small, megaphone won't. So it depends on the level of insulin, to give an analogy. But when it comes to glucagon, that means it's sufficiently high to produce glucose, demand-driven gluconeogenesis. If insulin was too high, you can't actually produce. And you still need, for your red blood cells and your brain, you need a certain amount of glucose. So if basically insulin was too high when you have protein and fat, then you wouldn't be able to produce any sugar, and then you'd be in trouble. Your body wouldn't work. The physiology isn't stupid. It's specifically designed to work within those bounds. It's only when we throw sugar in, carbohydrates like Kate is doing, that's when we derange that whole system. Then you magnify insulin because you're putting all three macros and you're throwing away, and you're pushing down, the ability to produce glucose internally because you're taking it in. And then that can create these ups and downs where you don't feel that great. And you can see it also from Salad Boy, his eyes are like that, and he's probably not sleeping well, and who knows what else. It's just crazy. How can you go from that paradigm when you just got some electrolyte issues, which could have been fixed by eating more protein or supplementing taurine? He goes all the way to, guzzling down shitloads of fructose. How crazy is that?
It's nonsensical. Oh God.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Anyway, I'm gonna blast out of here. I may have not covered everyone's. I wish I had more time in that regard. I do appreciate everybody for being here and all that. Just quickly there, could you explain why fruitarians, high carbs, can be so lean? Because they're not engaging the Randall cycle. It's simple as that. No, it doesn't actually. The insulin to glucagon only increases by 4-to-1 when you're eating pure carbs. It's only when you combine mixed energy. Because what happens is lipolysis gets down-regulated. Lipolysis gets switched off. And the laneway actually, and if you have really excess, which they never get to that, they never get to excess energy because they don't eat enough. That's why they waste away their muscles in the end, because they don't get enough energy. So that's why they lean out. But in many cases, they are, they'll go through their stores and then they'll become emaciated. No different than basically somebody who's starving, because that's what they end up. They're depleting all these stores. It's not a healthy way of losing weight. It's a very unhealthy way. You actually reduce your organ size as well, which can cause organ damage. So it is not a good way, believe me, in that regard. So, but obviously, if you disengage the Randall cycle, because and you're actually pushing everything through, through glycolysis and then into the Krebs cycle, because you don't have two energy sources in high amounts coming into the Krebs cycle. There's enough rate limiting to basically take that sort of stuff, especially on a fruitarian diet. There's very little energy coming in. There's not much energy in the amount. We call it calories, but that's just heat, is it for a bomb calorimeter? But, those energies in kilocalories, as they're called, described in that regard, that energy that goes in isn't sufficient. That is why they waste away, because that's what they're doing. They're wasting away. They're actually doing, it's like a fasting diet. It's like doing a fasting mimicking diet. That's what a fruitarian is. I should have mentioned that earlier with that question about fasting mimicking diets. Actually, that I think Deborah asked. That's actually what a fruitarian diet is. It's a fasting mimicking diet, based on the insufficient caloric intake, the amount of energy, as we call it, but I'm just using their language so you can understand what I mean, So basically the amount of kilocalorie energy that you're taking in is basically less than your body requires. So what happens is, you end up taking out of fat, and then basically once that runs out, you start taking out your muscle, and that's what happens, and they start losing muscle mass. So You know, it's one thing the durian writer understood, because he used to say to them, "You're all idiots, you fruitarians. You should be eating more sugar, even raw sugar." He understood that. That was what Walter Kempton was saying. But the problem is, it's still high in deuterium, it's still high in all that. It's still going to cause damage to your pancreas and all that excess sugar over years. So,
Yep.
you know, over 1 year, like Walter Kempton, there's not a problem on your pancreas. But if you're assaulting your pancreas with that level of glycation, it's going to cause damage. That's where taurine reduces the glycation, methionine, taurine, cysteine, all these sulfur amino acids. They reduce carnosine or reduce the glycation of the different organs, you know, from the assault of sugar. But these people do it over multiple years, and they do a lot of damage to their organs and stuff like that. But the reality is, you know, these fruitarians just lose because they're not getting enough energy in, and they're wasting away because they're on a fasting mimicking diet. You could do it on a keto diet, the opposite. You can just basically eat, you know, butter, a stick of butter every day, be in very high ketosis, and waste away, you know, and you'll lose all your fat cells. And when you've lost your fat cells, if you're not taking in enough butter, you'll start breaking down your muscles. So, you know, you'll go into a sort of a form of rabbit starvation, nearly equivalent. You'll start breaking down your muscle, you know, because you're not getting enough butter in. You know, if you're only eating a small amount, like 100 or 200 grams of butter, you know, and you're in sort of equivalent energy intake as the fruitarian. So it's either way, you're not engaged with the Randall cycle. You're in deficit. So you're basically going to take from your body. Anybody can do that. You know, you can do a fasting mimicking diet. You can do a long-term fast. You can do whatever to reduce. It really depends on what you want to do. You know, people sometimes can get their mindset in that, but it doesn't mean it's healthy. One actually produces low deuterium water and does not do damage to the mitochondria, but on the other hand, actually increases mitochondrial density. So it means that as you're getting older, you have more mitochondrial density, you're more stronger, capable of being more robust and all that. Their sort of diet increases the deuterium inside the matrix of the mitochondria, and that gets pumped into the, you know, there's these little like pockets, it's you know, these little pockets where they fill up with this proton gradient, and then they get pushed on both sides of these little pockets. If you look at the outer outer membrane of the mitochondrial membrane, that's where they fill up. But there's these little folds and all that. And in those folds is where the electron chains is on either side. And as the stuff gets filled up into that pumped in from the pumps, the complexes, it actually creates a gradient of pressure, and it pushes against, and then that rotates a complex, what we call complex 5, or the ATP synthase, and that produces energy for you in that regard. Now, if you put deuterium in there, where you put these neutrons, which is heavy water as we call it, because that's what's in fruit, is very high. It's the worst carbohydrate. What that will do is you'll slow down those motors, which means you'll reduce the energy that you actually use. So you'll be more lethargic, and you can see fruitarians are all more lethargic. And if you damage those motors because you're putting too much of this stuff in, you'll eventually bust these motors because you put too much in. You can slow them down. They rotate at 9,000 RPM, very fast. So if you're pushing stuff, you can slow it down. You can slow it down and go click, click. But if you push too many neutrons through, you'll bust the motor.
Mm-hmm.
And when you bust the motor, and you lose more and more of these these ATP synthase within those folds of your mitochondria, those mitochondria become senescent. They become aged. They can produce less energy. And your cells then get less energy to repair themselves, maintain themselves, and they age as well. So you're putting yourself on a course of aging via deuterium, you know. So don't do it. You know, it's not the way to lose weight. You could, if you want to lose weight, just go and eat butter all day, and you'll lose weight, plenty of weight if you want to do, because it's the equivalent of the fruitarian diet. That's what it is. It's a wasting away, a fasting mimicking diet. You want to do a fasting mimicking diet with butter? Go right ahead. It's the same thing. Anyway, guys, I'm out of here. I should be somewhere in about 7 minutes, and I have to put some clothes on and then get there.
Oh my.
So I'm out of here. See you.
Stay well, everyone.
Bye, guys.